I think it's been my most solid release in terms of just functionality. Like the game is working more or less, which I'm very happy about. So almost all the feedback has been gameplay stuff rather than bugs and things like that. There's been a few, but nothing major.
Yeah,
So I'm happy about that.
I remember. I think I was still in Tucson, so this would have been like prior to October when you gave me a build of this to play. Maybe even before that. But
Yeah.
I immediately like fell in love with this game. I legitimately would like wait for everyone to go to sleep and then stay up all night
Oh wow.
playing this game for several days. Uh, and it even got me to stop playing Baldur's Gate all night, and I was
Oh,
just excited, like, "Oh,
interesting.
man, this is fun and addicting, and there's something here." I mean, it was still a little rough around the edges at the time.
Yeah, and it always will be.
I mean, yeah, that's kinda your thing. Yeah, it wouldn't
I
be
can't escape it.
an authentic Schmidt Workshops game if there weren't some, little fun UI things that are like, "Oh, odd choice," or whatever,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
I mean, hey, that's what I like about indie games is that you can afford to take risks and do different things and, like you're not necessarily always going for like mass audience appeal, what's the best thing for everybody, but maybe what's you can do things. You can do things that are not approved by some corporate guy or some marketing dude who's like, "No, no, no, you should do it the way that it works for most people." Or
do you think,
test audiences were vetoing this one or
right,
um,
right. I
so
think I learned something really important from an art teacher I had once, uh, who said basically you should have a vision and a strategy. And the vision is all the things that are not negotiable about your art,
uh-huh.
and the strategy is everything else. So, if it's user friendly and it's uh, um, easy for people to understand, unless that goes directly against the vision of the game, I'm happy to do those things. But I do have limits. I'm an artist. I'm not so much a programmer. I'll be the first to tell you. uh, I do what I can, and then I stop.
Yeah.
But
What has, what was the inspiration for this game? Like, when did the idea pop into your mind for
I think this game has been brewing for decades, to be honest. Uh,
Okay.
uh, an RPG in a Lovecraftian environment has always been lingering in the back of my mind.
Mhm.
Um, I just never really knew how to make it.
That
So
makes sense.
then, after working on Islands of the Caliph, it was like, sorry, it wasn't even that. It was there was a game jam, dungeon crawler jam in 2024, and it said you can reuse stuff that you've already made for this jam, as long as you say so. As long as you made it or you paid for it, and you are upfront about it. And I entered that jam with 3 days left, and that was the original Cyclopean. It was a roguelike 3D dungeon crawler. Uh, you just had to escape the vaults of Vin with the ghasts and the gugs, and you had to rescue as many cats as you could on the way out. And it was just a very simple idea, and I reused all of the assets from Islands of the Caliph, and I just turned them green to get the aesthetic of the Apple II monitor that I grew up with. And that was it. It was 3 days. I did what I wanted to do. I accomplished, my basic goal there. And it did pretty well. It got like 11th place in the game jam, which I was happy with. And it was when I saw that it got 11th place, I was like, okay, this has to become a game.
How many
I mean,
partic
11th isn't like the best, obviously, but that was high enough on. It was like a couple hundred entries, so
Wow, that's
I was
actually
happy.
surprising.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And I knew if I think if I had spent more time on it, I might have ruined it. But 3 days was, like, perfect to make it because I knew I had to make it really simple, and each day I just posted the progression I was at. And those 3 original games, there's 1 per day of development. You can still play them, but, after I saw that it got 11th place, I was like, "Okay, this is the idea that I've been thinking about, and I can make this into something more, you know, more enjoyable and more, sort of deeper, in terms of the gameplay and the lore and the mechanics of it."
Right, and this came from, like, the Lovecraft's Dreamland cycle or dream
Yeah,
cycle.
that's a big thing that keeps I feel like people are not as familiar with the Dreamlands and the dream cycle as they are with his Cthulhu mythos
Right.
stuff. And I kinda have to explain, that Cthulhu's not in this. There's no deep ones here in the Dreamlands, which is fine. Because it's such a different vibe than his other work. I think there's a lot of stuff that kinda carries through. Some of the concepts are, very similar. Um, and you have some people like Pikmin,
Right.
he exists in the Dreamlands and in the waking world, the other story. So it kind of if Lovecraft was creating a single sort of Lovecraftian universe, which has been argued about whether he was or wasn't, whether these were standalone stories or not. Uh,
Definitely not.
I don't think so either.
Uh,
But
there's
some
only
of them aren't 100% consistent. Like there's an Innsmouth mentioned in Cellophase. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. It's one of the Dreamland stories,
yeah,
but it's in.
anything
I
that resembles the idea that he started with, like, I'm gonna make one whole universe is total retcon. Like, there's no
Yeah,
way.
but he ended up doing it. Whether it was fully intentional from the beginning or not is
Yeah.
obviously a different story. But yeah, I think he ended up there. You know,
It's the same
even
as
yeah,
anything that's a retcon story, like, Doom and or whatever, all the stuff that gets we start off with an idea, then we create it iteratively over time, and then later you're
right,
like, "Oh, let's find a way to tie it all together." I mean,
yeah,
of course, yeah, that did he create a consistent, somewhat universe and
yeah,
do so consciously? Yes. Did he sit down at the age of 20 and say, "For the rest of my life, I'm going to do one thing, which will be
yeah,
to create this." Yeah, I doubt it. There's no way.
exactly.
Yeah.
Um,
Um,
but yeah, the Dreamlands. I think it's a rich fantasy, sort of horror fantasy environment that hasn't really been explored a lot in video games that I've seen. Uh, if I can put enough caveats on there that I am aware of. So I felt like the time was ripe.
Another thing I think it's really cool. I've had a lot of people comment to me even that, like, "Oh, wow, it's like set in the dream cycle stuff. It's like that's different, you don't see that all the time." Which is funny to me because I wonder how many people have literally read all of Lovecraft and don't even realize that there are multiple different kind of like universes, so to speak. Like,
Yeah.
because I just assumed for the longest time this is all tied together, and unless you go looking at scholarly stuff about Lovecraft, it doesn't necessarily
Mm,
come up. If you're just reading the books in order as they come in, like I said, the compendium I have, it doesn't
right.
say, and here's where he changed it to the dream cycle or like
Right. Right.
what part of it it is. It's just another story.
You can get sort of a different vibe though from what they now refer to as the dream cycle stories. They're
Right.
more obviously dreamy, right?
Mhm.
They're not usually as scary and horrible uh, for the protagonist.
Yeah.
Um, and but yeah, I think the Dream Quest is kind of the culmination of all of that in a way, where he
Yeah.
really made it.
One of the cool things about like you as a game designer in general is like kind of seeing how you've evolved, not just from this point of view of designing a game, which we're going to probably touch on, but like, as a storyteller, how you have gone from, like, say, like, Star Explorers was, like, really simple premise
Yeah.
where it's just, all humanity's gotta find a new home. There's not a whole lot
Right.
explained about this. There's not a whole lot of lore to find. It's, like, all kind of iterative and made up to something like this where you're sort of, like, revealing more information to the player as they play. Like,
Mm.
you read a new book or you talk to a different character, and then there's all this lore that comes along with that.
Yeah.
So it's all a little bit more hands-on, and I thought that was really cool.
Well,
I
thank
think
you.
Caliph was really, from my perspective, where you cut your teeth with, like, the more
Mm.
direct storytelling.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I had a lot of text. This one doesn't have nearly as much.
Mhm.
I'm still adding stuff. I'm planning to make it a little bit more, deep. I don't know if deep is the right word. And it just more words.
Yeah.
Um, and kind of explaining to the play. The one thing I really enjoy about this one is the action log. I'm using it in a way where it explains how to play the game as you play it. So it's kind of like a retroactive. Oh, if you want to do more damage, it'll tell you exactly how the damage you just did was calculated. So okay, I need to. This is so obvious. It's not even something that requires explanation, but I need to raise my strength if I want to do more damage because I can see right there my strength did X amount of damage. Um,
As someone who did not grow up playing games that did such things with action logs and all that stuff, I will
mhm.
tell you that while I'm playing this game, I'm not reading that shit. Like, it
Yeah,
doesn't
that's fine.
it
That's
took
fine.
me a long time, like, several hours to, "Oh, there's something going on down here. Maybe I should pay
Words.
attention." Um,
And I think it's a perfectly fine way to play it. You don't have to read it.
right. Yeah.
And in fact, there's the game I'm borrowing that from very heavily is Path of Acra
Mhm.
by Ulf Sire. I don't know if you're familiar with him. It's like a roguelike, and it's not
Shaking
the
my head for
first.
the audience. Yeah.
It's not the first game to have a detailed action log, but it's definitely the first game that I've played where I really got into the action log.
Yeah.
And the first many hours I played that game, I didn't look at it. But then I would remember like I died suddenly. I was like, huh, what just happened? And like, oh, I can see exactly what just happened. And I can scroll through this thing and see, okay, this kind of enemy, I don't have any resistance to their fire attack, for instance. So I was taking way more damage than I needed to, and it killed me much faster than I expected it to. And now I know when I face those guys, I should make sure I have some fire protection. Just stuff like that. Uh, and it's not like there's a big manual that explains all these things. You just kind of learn it retroactively as you play. And I really liked that. I thought that was an excellent way to tutorialize the gameplay itself. Um, the unfortunate part is like you're learning it after the thing happens, but I think that kind of goes along with the theme of the game as well. Like it's a whole new world to explore, and you're not supposed to know what all these things are and how they operate,
Mhm.
but that's half the fun. And I think people who've read the story and are familiar with it will benefit from that knowledge because I always go back to the book when I'm making gameplay decisions. Like, um, and I'm just reading and rereading this story, Dream Quest, as I'm making this game, and I keep finding stuff like, oh, I could totally make that into a game mechanic. Like when Randolph Carter uh, gets the help of the ghouls and the night gaunts towards the end of the story, and it says the ghouls kind of helped him, uh, you know, negotiate and communicate with the night gaunts. And I was like, that sounds important. That sounds like I could mechanize whatever mechanize that as a gameplay feature. So I have this sanity meter, and some people really don't like sanity meters, but I like it because I'm using it a little differently than has been used in other games, in Lovecraft games. So the sanity meter, you can kind of you don't always have to be taking sanity damage from stuff. You can kind of balance it by having, like, for instance, cats in your party. They kind of give you sanity back. And if you have night gaunts and ghouls as allies, the ghouls will absorb some of the sanity damage that the night gaunts are doing to you. So you're taking damage while you have them as allies, but you can also recover that damage and kind of balance it out so that you don't go crazy. And if you do go crazy in this game, it doesn't kill you. It kind of sends you off on a little weird adventure where you end up waking up somewhere you weren't expecting, and you kind of have to figure out your way back to where you were. Uh, you might have lost an item or two along the way, but it's not a game ender.
What I really like about the sort of, just always experimenting with different ideas, especially in smaller indie stuff. Even like the more solo you are, the more you see experiments happen. I think where it's just
Yeah,
no one's gonna like default back to like no one's there to tell you like, hey, default back to like something that's already tried and true and proven.
right.
Um, so I mean, it's just like kind of purely like whatever's influencing you or come into your mind, and I do like that. But like the sort of meta strategy that you gain from paying attention to those little details that come up in the log or whatever versus the opposite, which I would say is like immersion, anti-meta storytelling where it's just only from the perspective of the player.
Right.
Uh, so I could give like an example. I recently, and everyone should try out this demo for Divine Frequency. I'm hoping to
Mm.
have developers of that on pretty soon, and that that
Was
game
that the Doom engine game?
you wouldn't know it was the Doom engine
GZ.
unless
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, you wouldn't know
No,
unless
it
you
looks amazing.
either look it up or hit the console button while you're playing because it's so like, it honestly, like, made me look at, like, some stuff that I've done Doom engine wise and be like, "Man, I feel like a child right now," you know? I feel like I've just been outclassed and
Fair
wrote some of
enough.
the
Fair enough.
wrote but, I mean, that's great, and I'm happy that it exists and the influence that it's gonna create amongst a lot of other developers, but even they, I think, took a lot from Total Chaos for folks who remember that, which is now, becoming a standalone game and being published by Apogee. So, very proud of, Wadaholic or Sam for doing that. I need to have him back on at some point to just kind of catch up on everything since Turbo Overkill has come out and now Total Chaos is becoming a standalone game. But point being, Divine Frequency takes a lot out of the page of making a Doom engine game not look like Doom at all. Like really, really impressive graphics considering what engine it's in, and also like the UI design. Most Doom engine games, even even Heat On, Shrine, all that stuff, they still kind of like you can tell it's GC Doom when you open up the menus and stuff that you wouldn't know with this
Yeah,
game,
yeah.
and it's amazing. But it's totally immersive. There's no UI on the screen really while you're playing it, other than
Okay, yeah,
opening up the
fair.
menu, checking your stats. It's very much like an immersive sim,
Yeah.
similar to System Shock. In fact, as I was playing the demo, I wrote to the team. I was taking notes like I did for you as well, and I'm like, "Oh, dude, like somebody here played System Shock a lot, and we're gonna be best friends." Because I'm wearing my Shock T-shirt right now,
Oh, nice.
and yeah, it's one of the Shock 2 is like one of the best games ever, but to
I
me anyway.
I finished that last year sometime.
What did you get
I
from it?
just uh it's good. It reminded me of some games I've played before, but it was pretty unique. Um and it was one of those things where I kind of just got used to just the action side of it first,
Mm.
then slowly realized, oh, there's other things I can be doing that are actually really helpful. But it took me a while to kind of accommodate that. I was but you realize slowly, like, you kinda have to you have to get into the research side of things. You can't just blast your way through everything,
That's
which
what I enjoy about it is
yeah, yeah,
directly opposite of, reading a detailed log about, like, what just happened,
yeah,
this
yeah,
how
yeah.
did this this particular enemy affect this one and me, or what are these two factions think about each other from reading a book. It's like in the world, which is
Yeah.
not right or wrong. It's just a totally different style of doing things. But
Yeah.
that was a really long tangent to just say you have, at least for me, opened my mind up to a different way of thinking
Mm.
about like how do you direct the player to make different choices and educate them on how the game works.
Yeah, that is probably one of the most challenging parts of designing a game, I think.
Yes, especially when you don't know how people are gonna use it, right?
Right, right,
Yeah,
for sure. Um, and I think I'm just kind of copying things that have worked for me, right?
yeah.
And then the Path of Acra again. I really appreciated that information appearing where it did and how it did, and thought, why not? Why not use that? That would make sense in this context because they're not similar games so much outside of they're both turn-based, you know, uh, turn-based action or turn-based combat type games. But um, I haven't played a lot of roguelikes, and I haven't played a lot of even CRPGs since the 80s, to be very honest. I did that all the time up until like the Nintendo Entertainment System came out, and then it was action games and platformers, and then FPS games. So I haven't really revisited CRPGs, modern ones. So I'm kind of just stuck in the 80s a little bit,
I
which is, I think, fine.
I think it's cool because we're sort of at a stage where if you do something that was only, that was common practice in the 80s, it's like new to a most gamers now. Like most people
I
who are
think so, and I don't know if this is gonna be an advantage or not, but I've noticed that even in the retro RPGs coming out,
Mhm.
nobody's really done the thing where there's a 3D dungeon and a 2D overworld, which is something I was so used to that. Like that was common practice back then. And yeah, maybe it went by the wayside for a reason, but I also think it's kind of a neat thing that got forgotten, and we'll see if it catches on again.
I think it's really cool. The first time that you walk into a dungeon in the game and you realize that's gonna be, unless you read the manual, which
Yeah,
guess
yeah,
what? I totally didn't. Uh,
yeah.
yeah, it's just like, "Oh, wow, okay, something different here." As opposed to completely different from the way you did with Star Explorers, where it is all, consistently
All
treated the
first
same.
person. Yeah, yeah,
And same with Islands of the Caliph, although I wouldn't, there's not really like dungeons in the same way.
yeah, yeah.
Um, but
I mean, they were dungeons when I made them, but then I realized I replayed some of the older dungeon crawlers like Bard's Tale, and the dungeons are in Islands of the Caliph are very lightweight dungeons, right? Like you're just taking one trip through this thing. You don't have to delve and come back and resupply and go back in and that's kind of where I wanted this game to go. Where they're a little bit tougher, a little bit longer, and not something you can just jaunt through in one trip.
yeah.
Mhm.
And the options that you give to a player for how to play the game, quite literally, using your mouse to click forward, side, strafe, all
Yeah.
that stuff
Yeah.
is like very different than what most players nowadays are going to be used to. They're, steering with their mouse and all that kind of thing.
Right.
You give
For sure.
options. It's like you wanna use your keyboard. Do you want to use the on screen menu? Um,
That was a direct sort of feedback from Islands of the Caliph, where I went keyboard only.
yeah,
And I went keyboard only for a very technical reason, which is it was a technical reason based on an aesthetic decision that I had made early on,
yeah,
which was to keep the game in a low resolution window. And instead of, and I don't even know if I have the right words to explain this, instead of making a bigger window and scaling up the graphics, I just scaled the whole window up, which is a thing you can do in the game engine I'm using. And it automatically scales everything in the window up correctly so it looks pixel perfect. And the problem is it's just like a zoomed in version of the window. So when you move the mouse across the window, it still thinks it's a very small window, and the mouse speed goes up really fast, right?
Mhm.
When it's in the window. And I couldn't resolve that when I was making Islands of the Caliph. So I just left the mouse out, and I thought, nobody will care. But yeah, people cared. Um, and I saw how much people cared.
Yeah.
And I thought, okay, the next game I will include mouse support because exactly the reason when I played all of the dungeon crawlers I've ever played, I played them before computers had a mouse, right? There was this was the Apple II days for me, uh, and there was no mouse back then. So, and I didn't like when they included a mouse because it messed up my sort of flow.
Right.
I remember trying a few games out, and that kind of was what turned me off of them later, and put me towards like more action games at that point. But yeah, I thought, okay, I can make this compatible with keyboard only, mouse only, or controller only, or any combination you want to feel comfortable using. And I thought that was a good, healthy sort of balance.
I think that in the world of making games, they're like the 3 truly unsung heroes of game design that get taken for granted the most are like, I mean, sound designers,
Mm.
QA testers, and user interface design. Because
Yeah, yeah,
the
I
money
can see
to
that.
be made in games really does come down to user interface. Like, it's
Yeah,
like, uh take Baldur's Gate 3. This is like cutting edge, modern. They have the best of the best working on it. If you plug a
sure.
controller in, the entire user interface of the game changes to accommodate the fact that you've just done that.
Oh well,
Like, it
nice,
completely changes for the
interesting. Yeah,
to work in that format. And it's not something you see every day, but it's just, yes, having options is huge for gaining a lot of audience because so many different people are gonna have different preferences, like you preferring to play a game that is something that you're used to, which is playing with a keyboard.
yeah,
That's great, and there's nothing wrong with making a game where you're like, "I want to serve the audience of people who like that," but there's
yeah.
also, if I have the option to play the game how I like to play games, with the
Mhm.
controller, with the mouse and keyboard, with a I don't know, using my eyeballs to direct things around and, sensory sensory detection and all that stuff, whatever works, because you could find that people, A, enjoy it in a different way, but also they are, they I'm struggling to find words for this. A whole new group of people may like a game that otherwise would not have tried it,
Yeah, yeah.
and
I think that is a valid, absolutely valid thing. The reason I struggle with it still, and I still question whether it's the right choice for me as a designer, is I'm not very good at that. UI design is hard, and it's a huge area where bugs and stuff can sneak into your script. Uh, and that's all time I could have been spent making a more interesting game, you know? But for this game for sure, I'm sticking with what I've got now. It seems to work. Uh, I'm gonna have these 3 modes of, input, that the player can choose from, and I think I'll probably use that going forward in my game since I've accomplished it once. It shouldn't be too hard to do again in the future, but it was definitely a struggle to get it to that point. Um, it
for me, I just really like, what do I bring to the table for the design of a game? For the reason why I got into business was because
Mhm.
I wanna be able to tell the stories I wanna tell and not have someone else tell me how to do it, right?
Yeah,
So
for sure.
I am primarily concerned, say, when someone plays Stellar Valkyrie, with the story. Like, how do
Okay.
I get to tell this story to the most people possible? And I could have probably made different choices as to what engine to use and all that kinda thing if I was really concerned about mass
Right.
digestion. That's not really the idea, but just I want people to enjoy this story. How do I get them to do that? So I would not, and maybe the designers that are working with me would, but I wouldn't make a choice that limits that, if that
Yeah.
makes sense.
Well, I
Um,
mean, there's definitely a choice I'm making about that limits the audience, which is I am not making this for consoles. A lot of people have asked. I don't have the bandwidth. I don't have the knowledge. I don't have the skill set. I don't have anything to do with consoles. So if I did try that, I think the game would cease to uh, exist. Basically, the game itself
mhm,
would stop developing. It would all be about getting it onto the consoles. And I
yeah,
think if I hit a game that really strikes a nerve with an audience and it makes enough money, right, then I can worry about that. And that might be a self-defeating attitude. I don't know.
I don't
Uh,
think it is. I think it's as you said, like
yeah,
you need to be able to digest and put out what you're trying to make, and if it's too much, to worry about, it may slow down the entire process to the point
yeah,
where
yeah.
you're not making anything. And
Right,
there's
exactly.
always gonna be pros and minuses to having other people involved because, I mean, for me, I am really comfortable delegating to as long as I trust the person I'm delegating to, right?
Yeah. Yeah, this is a
So
skill I do not have,
yeah,
as you
it's
know.
you and I think, Jason Smith from Cultic, he had an appearance on another podcast where he was talking about how, like, if I were to work with a team, by the
Mhm.
time I have explained to them what I want in my head and they've come back to me and I've given feedback and all that kind of shit, I might as well have just done it myself.
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
totally, totally get that.
And my situation is not like that at all. I think I probably spend longer, but I'm in love with the process of learning how to do these things, and, um, I don't know, if I don't do it, I don't see it as my game. Like, I was an artist, a fine artist, painting, sculpting for the first 30 years of my life. Well, maybe not the first 5 or 6, but after that, I was full-time artist. So I was in my mid-30s before I started game design, and I get that game design is often a group experience, but all of my art making had been an individual experience. I have yet to understand how to let go of part of it to someone else,
Imagine
you
you
know?
were making it sculptures
Yeah,
and you're used to doing it by yourself, and then you get very ambitious to the point where you wanna make Mount Rushmore.
yeah.
There's just no chance of you doing it alone,
Of
so you
course,
have
no,
to find a way
I'm
to
not.
yeah,
Yeah. I'm not denying that it happens in fine arts. It never happened in my I was never that ambitious.
right.
I like to be able to sit in a quiet place and work on stuff. Like it's a very personal kind of expression, I guess you'd call it.
I I feel you. I just like it when everybody in the team has their own channel to do that.
Yeah,
So instead of it being the whole game, to me, it's like I wanna write the story, and I want
mm,
someone who's better than me to design the user interface. And I want
yeah,
someone who's better than me to draw the monsters. And so then, like, kind of everyone's collective talents have their own lane, and as long
yeah.
as you can keep that all, consistent with each other, then that's, I mean, to me, that's how the best things get made.
I don't deny that,
Yeah.
and I think theoretically you're absolutely right, and I agree with it. I just
Mm.
haven't figured out how I fit into that yet.
You
Although
don't have
I did do a game jam
yeah.
with a small group of people. Um, I wasn't very happy with the results. It didn't get to the level where I would have felt comfortable releasing it, so I'm not gonna tell you where it was or what happened to it.
Yeah.
Um, but I thought that was at least a good step outside of my shell, and I think I'll probably do it again. Like, maybe once a year, I'll do a game jam with a different group of people or the same group of people and see what happens. because I do think you're right as far as
Yeah.
things can happen faster and bigger and more interestingly when you're with a group of like-minded people.
Like-minded is important. I think,
Yeah, for sure.
the culture of the group, and yeah, that's all important. I've definitely been my fair share of teams that did not work because like people
Yeah,
have totally different ways of looking at something, or and that's okay too.
yeah,
I mean, you wouldn't want a soccer team where there's a goalkeeper who does not want to conform to the game of soccer because he's like, I'm more of a hockey player and I don't
right.
really care about that, and that's okay. Um, you just need a different person on that team, and for that guy to go play hockey, no problem. Um, yeah, I think that your way of doing things is perfectly valid. It's in the strict sense of it being art, of games design being art,
Hmm.
then you're doing the right thing. The only part I would question is, is that what's sustainable as a business such that you can continue to do it? And that's pretty
Right.
much my job, is having that conversation with
Yeah, for
people all
sure.
the time. So it's like I have no interest in compromising anyone's artistic way of looking at things or their expression. What I'm interested in is like, how do I get you to a point where you can do that and it's your job? Like if that's what you want, or at
Yeah,
least that it's sustainable enough that you're going to keep doing it and not decide, well, I have to go where the money is, because like the money could be here if you are willing to, not necessarily. It's That's the other big thing, is like not necessarily to compromise your vision, but just to be open minded to new solutions that will make you more, hopefully more money, or more,
yeah,
reach more people. Accessibility is a huge thing.
yeah,
Link, just designing your game so that it can be easily translated into other languages is a huge thing.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so,
That's true.
but
And I'm working on that right now with Islands of the Caliph.
right.
Because I did set it up so I thought so that it could easily be translated, but it turns out um, most of the other languages on Earth are not English.
Or Latin. Yeah.
Well, you need a special kind of text file to display the characters in a lot of other languages,
Yeah.
and I didn't know that.
That's where
So,
having a guy whose job that just comes.
yeah. Well, so what I've managed to do, I managed to convert the text files in Islands of the Caliph to this, I think it's a 16-bit file versus an 8-bit file, and that allows for the other languages. So it does have that capacity now. And just today, I just took it out and was kind of uh, troubleshooting it a little bit because there was some weird text that was showing up. Figured out as far as I'm aware, all of the weird bugs that happened when I converted the text files. So now it's basically ripe for translating. This is a whole other issue. I don't know how to translate things. I don't know who to talk to translate things. Do I make this a community thing or go and just hire someone? I don't have funds necessarily to do that. So it's like it's not like it's going to happen this weekend, right?
No.
But it's definitely something I'm interested in and I'm working towards, as on a very slow basis. And interested in how it turns out
Yeah, I think that
because
Caliph
yeah,
being like, if it were translated directly into Arabic even, would just be huge.
Arabic and Turkish and lots of those Middle Eastern
Persian.
languages version
I
would
don't know
be.
how much Iranian people play video games. I don't think there's a
I don't
game
either.
on. Yeah, but
I
it'd be
don't either.
interesting to know.
Yeah.
How would you sell it to them even if you could? Like that's a big question too. But
I mean, people can always pirate my games.
that's true.
I'm not advocating that, but I also understand that isn't necessarily bad for me as a game designer. There's a there's an immediate sort of loss of a sale, for instance, but it's the logic of it is that person wouldn't have bought it anyway.
Mhm.
And yeah, so I don't put these, copy protection things for that reason. A, because it's a whole headache that I don't want to deal with, and B, I don't want my game to eventually be like locked up behind some copy protection thing and no one's able to play it because I died and there's no one to be able to go in and figure out how it works. I'm sure the cracking guys figure it out eventually, but
I
why
feel like
bother? Why
if
bother?
they really want it, they'll get it. But
Yeah, yeah,
uh, I mean, what's interesting about piracy is that it's almost universally a. uh, it's not necessarily the behavior of a kleptomaniac. It's the behavior of someone who otherwise can't access it.
yeah.
Like the
In
first
general, I
reason
agree.
someone's
Yeah,
gonna pirate a game is because they can't get it by an easier method, or they don't
yeah,
have money. But then to me,
right.
I'm like, okay, if you don't have the money to purchase what I have, it's not that I don't want you to have it. It's not that I need you to go sell a kidney to buy my game. I would rather you have it and then tell other people that you know how
Yeah,
great you think it is, and then them potentially buy it. And the more people are playing it, the better for everyone, and more people are enjoying your artwork.
I
So
agree with that. I
I think
agree with that. I do have a secondary side note to that, which is if you really can't afford my game, you probably should focus on your career.
that's pretty cheap.
Like, give it some effort.
I'm thinking in the
Yeah,
case of like
yeah,
some fucking teenager in Bulgaria
absolutely.
or
Yeah,
or
absolutely.
Argentina or somewhere like that, where it's like I don't want you
Yeah,
to not be able to access.
right. It's gonna be like $900 for them or something. We don't
Yeah,
want that either.
marketing side, like you generally speaking, like first order of business is to make your game scale to other countries' economies. So like
Yeah,
Argentina and Turkey are the two biggest pirating countries that
yeah,
or at least that are currently tapped in the market. And
yeah,
the reason for that being because most of the time people put their shit on like sale and then it becomes dirt cheap.
yeah.
Like it costs nothing in those two countries because, you know,
I've
it,
seen it happen.
yeah, me too. Like, trust me.
Yeah.
That actually happened. I don't know if I can talk about this, but I'm gonna do it anyway. With when Ion Fury's sequel came out,
Mm,
Aftershock,
yeah.
I think there was an incident where it was like I don't remember who's. I don't blame anybody, but it's just like it went on sale and then the price was super low, so, like, it sold a shitload of copies in Turkey,
Yep.
and then it was like, "Oh, like, think of all the sales that we lost because of
Right.
that," and I'm thinking like, "No, they weren't gonna buy the game anyway. They're just gonna take this and sell it on G2A in a lot of cases for more money than they just bought it for," and
Right.
that's
Right.
true, but it wasn't like you didn't lose a sale on that. In fact, you just gained a bunch of sales at a smaller price, and it's interesting.
It's true. I did
Yeah.
end up raising the price on one of my games for that reason because
Yeah.
Anomalies, that was my first Steam release.
Still one of my
Uh,
favorites of yours. I still open it up and just play with it sometimes. I'm like,
I
"This is"
am still using the music from there, much to the chagrin of many of the people who saw my YouTube video.
Mhm.
Uh, but I like it. Um, it's not negotiable. Uh, it was 99 cents for a while. It originally was 3.99. Then I lowered the price. I thought, this is not really a game that I should be trying to sell for profit. It's more of a fun little uh, gadget kind of thing. But I saw like 2,000 sales in Turkey, or no, it might have been Argentina. I can't remember. I was like, that's not fun. That's not enjoyable to see because there's someone else like profiting off of that, and they shouldn't be. That's the kind of piracy I don't think I can get behind. I'm not. I would never advocate piracy in general. This is like I would actively try to stop it. So I just raised the price um, to 3.99 again because that's where it started off, and I haven't seen that kind of stuff happen. And I think the reason that game got targeted because it has the Steam cards, and it has I think it's the Steam cards. That's the thing.
Yep.
Not every game has them because
Okay.
when that came out, there was no. You could start the game with them,
Mhm.
right? And then later they added a limit. You had to sell a certain number of copies first. Then you get access to the Steam cards.
I've bought a few games off of profit from selling all my Steam cards because I
Oh
have
wow!
zero interest in some
Yeah,
stupid digital trading card. So I'm
right,
like,
right.
I'll just whatever the recommended price is on Steam, I just raise it to like the maximum, and then people buy
Okay.
them. I don't know why. And then next
Oh
thing I
wow!
know, I've got like $3 or $4 to go buy
There you go.
anomalies with. But
Yeah,
I don't understand why people value those things, but they do, and there's a market in it. So for sure, people will try to get a hold of them and then just do exactly what I just said with them.
yeah.
And yeah,
And if you just bought 2,000 copies of Anomalies for $6 or something,
yeah.
I don't know.
So much more work than it's worth, man. Like I don't want
I'm
to make
sure
like
it is.
Steam accounts, like or manage passwords for them. Like who has the time? But some people do.
Yeah, there
Um,
must be some benefit people are seeing that justifies it. But
or they're just insane, which is I feel like we hit. You got to leave room for crazy. People seem to forget this nowadays. They're like, oh,
yeah,
well, there must be some rational reason why they think this or feel that way. And I'm like, some people are just fucking crazy. We used to all agree on this.
I mean, it might sound profitable, at the macro level, sort of.
Mhm.
But once you get into the nitty gritty of it, are you calculating the amount of time and effort involved? Or maybe they just have bots. They might just have robots doing all the actual work.
Yeah,
So I have no idea what they're doing with these things. But
none of my business, I guess.
yeah, I don't want to encourage it though.
So
It happens.
uh,
It happens.
in the game itself, you have obviously sourced a lot of the storytelling from the original short story by Lovecraft.
Yeah.
Um, d- how did you choose which short story by Lovecraft to
Well,
use?
I know it was going to be the Dream Quest of
Mm,
Unknown Kadeth. Um, I read that when I was in high school, and there was no internet back then. There was nobody telling me Lovecraft was racist and this and that. If I had read the stories more carefully, I would have realized that. I realize now in hindsight, but back then it was monsters and it was demons and it was Cthulhu and I wasn't looking at the undertones of his work back then. But that was 30 years ago, 40, like almost 35 years ago. The stories have stuck with me. Like that's what um, I feel like that was so formative for me and who I am, what my identity is, what my even to a degree what my beliefs are.
mhm.
Uh, that it just has to come out somehow. That whole kind of thing had to form some kind of expression for me because the imagery, the concepts, all of that worked their way deep into my brain a long time ago. uh, you got to work it out somehow, and this is my way of doing that. But I love the Dream Quest, and subsequently being on Lovecraft forums and stuff and talking to other people. That's not one of his most liked stories by any stretch.
Mhm.
What I've seen is it's like talking to people about the first Rush album.
The deep cut.
Uh,
Yeah.
it's a deep cut, and there's or even like some of the later '80s Rush albums where they were more keyboard driven. Like there's a whole part of that community is just like, no way, that's not for us. That's not our Rush. And this is Dream Quest is that for the Lovecraft community. So many people are just like, what is this stuff? This is not his writing. But I read it again. I'm a teenager. I don't have this critical thinking. I can see why people say that about it, but I love it. Like it's so amazing to me still. Like because you've got uh, it's just such a different fantasy sort of realm that I've never seen anywhere else. right? It's not high fantasy with elves and dwarves and orcs. It's not cyberpunk. Uh, it's not any of the trope sort of genres that we have that are explored to the nth degree. It's really something I feel like is unexplored. I've only seen one or two video games that really look into it, and even the Cthulhu side of Lovecraft. That's I don't want to say overdone because I'll probably do another game like that too, but it's a lot more explored than the Dream Quest side of things, the Dreamlands. Um, at least in video games that I'm aware of. I'm putting the caveat back on there. And it's such a totally unique uh, thing and realm sort of to explore. It has this mystical quality that I've never encountered before. Thought I would like to share that with the world.
I really enjoy. Have you ever read that book, the War of Art? Yeah. So that way of kind of thinking about how ideas emerge to people,
Mm,
whether you believe in a metaphysical muse or not, just the metaphor of like that's how an artist of any kind sort of
mhm,
finds inspiration. Is like whatever you're looking for just sort of presents itself to you when you're in the right mindset.
mhm,
And so like some people may approach this completely differently, where they're well, I want to make a Lovecraft influence book, but I want to use something that people haven't really like dived into. Like I want to get away from the Cthulhu thing. So they're flipping
yeah,
through the book and they're like, oh, this, okay, that's different. And then they
sure.
start from there. As opposed to this was just something that you read and enjoyed as a kid. And then you're like, I really like to do something with that. Like I could see
Yeah.
the potential in it. And sort of the the statue is already inside the marble. It's your job to just bring out the
Mm,
statue of David that's already in there, sort of mindset. And I love that. I try to actively just let things be that way.
mm.
Um, as that
Yeah, that
oxymoronical as that may be.
I
Um,
think that's the game is what happens when you're making the game.
mm,
And you could say that about any art form, but I worked on this game. It was very rough. When I first showed it to you, it was basically just the rough sort of outline of what I had in mind. And I'm really happy I went with early access, actually, because I'm getting great feedback from players. And I play the game. I am enjoying the game, but it really helps to see what other people are experiencing. And their ideas will spark an idea in me, which will make me put something new in the game and which will inspire some idea in them, and it will kind of there's almost like a cadence of different concepts going back and forth, like bouncing back and forth, and some of them are just misses. Like they'll tell me, and I'll just put this out here, like there's a certain build where you can align yourself with the moon beasts and the men of Ling,
mm.
which in the story they're villains, they're the bad guys. But I just put it in there as an option, like you can become a bad guy if you want to. But they're enemies with the cats, who are, arguably the good guys or on the good side. And you might end up fighting and killing cats in that case. And I didn't really think about the implications of this when I made that mechanic, but one one person was like, I don't like the sound of the cats when I kill the cats. Can you make there an option to turn off the sound? And I was just like, hell no. You can't. What are you talking about? Like,
You should feel, you should feel guilty when you kill a cat. Like
yeah, like what are you talking? Oh man.
I want to
And
be
I
able to
feel
kill cats, but I don't want you to remove the part that makes me feel the emotions that come with that. Yeah.
yeah, there's certain things that I have to draw a line. Uh maybe I should have drawn the line before I allowed the player to kill cats.
Yeah.
Maybe there's an argument there for sure. But it is a Lovecraft story. The cats were in fights in the story. There were battles. I I'm sure some of the cats were, you know, defeated in this situation. I don't think he described that, to be honest. Maybe all the cats lived. I don't know. But uh, I don't think the cats are like immortal or impervious to damage or anything like that. So I wanted to have that as an option, you know, where the player leads sort of the dream life that they want to.
Right.
But then there's definitely consequences, and a lot of people were not ready for the consequences in like Islands of the Caliph when I allowed you to release the gin from the bottle. But I warned the player, like, don't do it, don't do it. And this is one of those things that you can do it, like you said, in an indie game that would never make it into the you know mainstream because uh, I don't think people are expecting that. I think people like to have that power fantasy, and Lovecraft is not a power fantasy. If anything, it's the opposite. It's a horror game. It's a horror story. Uh, there is a time in this story where it feels like he's getting really powerful and really influential and really he's got this whole army of ghouls and night gaunts and all that. But ultimately, on the quest he's on, that served very little except maybe towards getting him a little further than he could have gotten on his own. You know, those things couldn't protect him from the powers and the sort of adversaries he was up against, and that's kind of where I'm hoping to take this game in a way where you might think you're really cool,
Right.
but you're not. So
And I like the psychedelic aspects of anything to do with Lovecraft in general,
mm,
but the way that these sort of like weird metaphysical ideas are presented, and that happens in all kinds of like especially fantasy games.
yeah,
Or you got to have some kind of openness to like the magical part of this universe. But like I'm thinking of you. You turned me on to Dreams in the Witch House,
yeah. Oh, the
and
game. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, I'm really I've been working on it for a long time. I'm gonna get Atom Brain games on the show,
Oh, yeah.
sometime
Cool.
sometime hopefully in the near future. Not sure exactly when. But I fell deeply in love with the visual storytelling of that game. Like
hmm
how when you go into the dream world, he uses all the sort of like Rosicrucian and Freemasonic imagery to,
Yeah.
do that what's the other world and the universe on the other side of the door stuff, like, that's
Right.
amazing. That was so smart, and I think, the vast majority of players who are not, like, initiates, I'm doing air quotes for that, are not gonna know what these things mean, but they'll probably recognize it from seeing it in other places like Twin Peaks, that kinda thing,
Right.
the
Right.
checkerboard floors and all that. See, if you've never been inside of a Mason's lodge, these are things you may not know.
Okay.
But the subconscious association with certain symbols and metaphysical thinking, I think is incredible. It was so smart. I would love to know how he came across that information, Could be
Oh,
that he's
interesting.
like a Mason, for all I know. But
I
yeah,
honestly didn't recognize the things you're talking about when I played it,
it may be
which,
completely by accident,
yeah,
that's
it
also
doesn't
yeah.
surprise me. But
Mm,
I took it like from the story, he describes these geometrical shapes and stuff that happen when he's entering this,
mhm.
dimensional sort of portal or whatever he ends up going through with the witch. And I just took it as that, like that was his understanding of what Lovecraft described. But if it's referencing other metaphysical things, yeah, that's an interesting take for sure.
Very well could be that Lovecraft himself was referencing other mystical
Right.
things, or my
Absolutely.
pet theory that he's channeling information that he may not have been privy to,
Mm.
and the coincidence of it being that is interesting.
He was a pretty avid reader, so I wouldn't be surprised if he encountered a lot of those things.
especially during the time that he was alive, you have, especially Crowley's work
Yeah.
being publicized and going all around the world and talking a lot about the just general, esoteric order of the Golden Dawn information
Right.
that was floating around the world at the time. It's totally possible Lovecraft himself was influenced by that, but
Yeah.
being that it is a description in a book and not a visual representation of that, the the way that it's shown in the game is incredible. Like
Mm.
and it says like weird geometric shapes, the choice of what weird geometric shapes to show. Interesting.
Yeah.
Very, very smart. And
Yeah.
potentially also by accident. Could be that your influence and in tandem with whatever the muse is telling you at the time of creation. That's so interesting to me.
Mhm.
The older I get, the more open-minded to this kind of stuff I've become, where it's just like, where does an idea come from? What is a thought? Yeah. What
That
is
is interesting.
consciousness? What doth life, man? Um,
You're making me think about another Lovecraft story, which is the case of Charles Dexter Ward. I don't know
Great one. Yeah, love that one.
how many
Almost did
times.
that
How many
to
times have you read it, Ty?
once,
Okay,
exactly
I've
one.
read it a lot, and there's something in there, and I'm sure Lovecraft was very intentional about this. He's talking about different people being raised back from the dead
Mhm,
via their essential salts. And he makes all of these very interesting hints at who this person is that finally comes up at the end and kind of helps the protagonist.
mhm,
And but it never says who that person is by name. But there's all these hints, and it kills me because I don't know enough about this sort of occult type stuff. It's not something I'm really that interested in going and exploring too deeply.
mhm,
Uh, but I'm sure if someone were to do that, they would be able to figure out who he was talking about. And a lot of people say it was Merlin,
mhm.
and maybe it was. And I just don't have the requisite background knowledge on Merlin to know that that is in fact who it is. But I haven't found a really solid argument for any particular
Having read the
character.
story only once and a long time ago, I feel
Yeah,
like there's an art to the fact that it could be left open to interpretation, and there's also an art to the fact that
for sure.
the archetype that he's pointing to has many names and many different
Mm,
iterations throughout time. So it could be Merlin, but if you decide it's Merlin, you could also say it's like Hermes Trismegistus or something like that.
mm, okay.
Or you could say it's Thoth from Egyptian time.
Oh,
You could say,
so these are sort of recurrences of the same archetype.
yeah, the archetype of the wise bringer of knowledge to the
Mm,
hero in the story. So
okay, okay.
yeah, I mean, if you read, I mean, no, I mean, I don't mean literally go read them, but I mean information on the Emerald Tablets of Thoth the Atlantean from Egypt.
Mm,
A lot of this stuff is like kind of the beginnings of Hermetic philosophy,
okay.
and that permeates throughout all of Middle Eastern religion, which is why it's still part of the zeitgeist today, even if you don't recognize it by the name that it was originally used. Hermes being Thoth, being Mercury, being it gets a little bit more diluted the further away you get from the source. But I mean,
I see.
that idea. So in the story of Arthur, the Arthur himself is sort of is the hero in the story, which biblically could be many different characters, but they themselves are sort of that as well, like a recurring
Okay,
archetype. You know, here's the hero
right,
of the story. Be that Abram, be that Abraham later in life,
right.
or Elijah or whoever. There's the source of knowledge that gives them like, hey, you need to know this stuff. And Merlin in this particular context is the Hermes, or in the Jesus story, you could say it's John the Baptist,
Mm,
the initiator.
okay.
Yeah. But that's just how I read it. I mean, it
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
could be literally he was just pointing to some very particular character. I don't know.
That's what it seems like to me, but again, that's what you just said sounds very feasible as well.
Uh-oh, at least. Um, now I just find that so fascinating though, just the whole concept of, like, how does one come up with the ideas that they present? Um, and, as I said, I try to think about in my own life when for instance, so if you don't mind me disclosing this information, you and I had talked a lot about working together on this game and then
Yeah.
ultimately decided now's not the time to do that.
Mhm.
Um, and I was actually, like, going into January, like, "Well, time's kind of the essence here. We need if we're gonna do
Yeah.
this, we need to do it, or shit or get off the pot," kind of
Right.
mindset.
Right.
And I'm not gonna lie to you, I was a little bummed out when we didn't go forward, but I had to, like, go through that mourning process and then accept in my mind, I'm thinking, "It's meant to be something else is going to come up." Like,
Mm.
the thing that's gonna, occupy my time this month will occur if I
Yeah.
just stop worrying about it. And then, of course, something came along. Now I'm doing that. Everyone's happy. So the it just seems like things just kind of like manifest in that way.
Yeah.
And whether that's just it seems that way because that's how humans are meant to think about things, fine. But just approaching it from that mindset seems to help make people not miserable.
Mm.
Um,
This is uh, it's almost, I mean, it's reminding me of something in my life, and it's maybe slightly different, but
mhm,
right along the same lines, which is when I've seen opportunities come up, they never come individually. It's almost always there's one opportunity, and then at the same time, there's another opportunity, and I have to pick.
branching paths. Yeah.
It's, like, so obvious to me, like, "Oh, there's these 2 things, now I have to choose," and I'm like, "I wish I could do both," or, "I wish I didn't have to choose," or, like, it's just this it's a test, right? Like, I see it as a test, and I have to pick the right one to the best of my knowledge and just go with it and forget about the other one because, obviously, you can't do 2 things at the same time in these situations, so, I don't know if that's exactly what you're talking about. It seems like almost, another facet of that same part of reality where
Mm,
once you choose something, the things that happen because of that choice will start coming in. They'll start flooding in, and you have those additional opportunities and or whatever they are. Uh, but yeah, it certainly feels intentional somehow to me on those occasions. Like it's
there's
not an accident. It's not an accident. It's like, yeah, this was destiny coming. Here it is.
yeah. I sort of feel like, if you even if you, like, choose a path and you walk down it halfway and then you like, sometimes you'll have, like, a feeling like, "I don't know if I'm doing the right thing," and then you get
Yeah.
down and there's a tree that falls in front of you on the path, and you're like, "Well, I wanna keep going down the path I've already chosen, so I'm gonna climb over this tree," and then another tree falls, and it's like and
Mm.
then, then there's a wolf in the road, and it's like,
Right.
maybe I should just cut my losses and go back to the fork in the road and choose
Yeah,
the other
yeah,
path.
for sure. Or
Or do you commit
that
to
can happen.
the journey you're on, which is also
It
fun?
it depends. Well, for me, I would go to the religious side of things and think, what is the lawfulness of this choice? If this is something I'm absolutely sure is a right thing, I will I will be much more likely to commit to that. If this is something that's like a gray area and trees start falling, I'll be like, maybe better to go
Mm,
back.
right.
Uh, you don't want to be too brave, yeah, with some of your choices.
And the question
Um,
is who is who are you being brave against
yeah,
and
exactly. Yeah.
for what reasons? Yeah.
Well,
Uh,
this was something I learned very, very long time ago, and it was just, I'm sure it's out there. the definition of evil,
Mhm.
which comes from overreaching, which I always felt like, wow,
Yeah.
that's almost hard to swallow because I was always told, like, you can do whatever you want, you can be whatever you want, you can accomplish anything you want if you put your mind to it. And but I think there's also limits to that. There's a balance. And
Mhm.
if you set your sights a little bit too high, you've got the story of what is it, Daedalus and Icarus and flying too close to the sun and all that. These stories are there from our past for a reason also. Like you can get pretty high on the knowledge you have, but there's going to be a ceiling that you're going to bump into at some point. And it can take generations for people to understand how those limits can be overcome. Like if you just think about space travel, for instance, which I do a lot,
Yeah.
you know, getting up and flying was a huge hurdle. And although it didn't take that much longer to get into space, if you look at the whole history of humankind, it did require a heck of a lot of effort to overcome those that barrier. Right? It was once people realized they could fly, now you have investment. Now you have people spending full time. There's the whole, physics departments and, fuel research and all this sciencey stuff happening that allowed people to get then into space. But the amount of effort put into it was way more, I think, than it was basically the people, hobbyists, figuring out how to fly on their side on their weekends. I don't want to undermine what Wilbur and Orville Wright were doing. I'm sure it was harder than that, but
Right.
they were bicycle shop guys. Yeah. So this was like you didn't have NASA
Right.
back then.
I think there's a lot to be said for just the the ch- the influence of the will to change things, and
Mm,
collective will seems to change things more than
yeah.
individual will. You know,
Yeah.
to a greater or lesser degree, depending on like maybe the amount of will you have or power or whatever.
Right.
But like, you know, whether or not NASA as an institution is a better innovator than say SpaceX, which is, this is like one dude surrounding themselves with a bunch of other dudes in business who have the same goal,
Yeah.
right? And there's a part of that that's like the skill and the science and the application and the availability of resources and the ability to make a decision without having to go through bureaucracy, et cetera.
Yeah.
And there's also just like what NASA brings to the table is that like the American nation altogether has a mission to get to the moon or to
Right.
Mars or whatever. And all of the people being behind the idea, money or also being a factor in this, makes it happen. Um,
Yeah.
so there's a bit of a magic to that as well. Uh,
Yeah. I
I,
kind of like I'm going to use this word in its original sense,
uh-huh,
the socialist approach to space travel.
uh-huh.
I'm not saying communist. I'm not saying authoritarian
Yeah,
autocracy. I'm saying socialist in the original English usage of the word, which is where public money was used for the social good,
correct.
right? Which is something that happens in the United States a lot that we don't normally appreciate. I didn't want to go political, but I'm using the word as I understand it and hope that people can understand it as
Mhm,
well. That it doesn't have to be linked to for um, anti-American concepts. It's like, no, we're pooling our money here for something that we all want. And
right.
I think I like that approach to space travel specifically, just because, yeah, it kind of affects. We're one world when it comes to that. We could be one sort of people if we are. the Earthlings, and it's way too fast to. We're still so divided as a world that it's ridiculous to talk about it like that. But that doesn't mean it can't happen in the future when Star
What
Trek comes.
what's interesting is the you used the word evil meaning overreaching,
Yeah,
before, and on both sides of the good or evil coin, there comes a point in the story where the hero or villain
yeah,
makes a decision against the will of the people that's what's best for everyone. And
mm,
so, like, are you the executive decision to be like,
right,
well, maybe everyone doesn't agree that we should be putting our money towards space, but since I've decided it's what's best for the group as a whole, and they'll get used to the idea over time, that's what we're doing. And,
yeah,
and that could be perceived as an evil. You're doing something against our will. It's not what we want, so we need to focus on this or that or whatever. Our money would be better spent here or the other way around. And that's also interesting because you never really can tell who the heroes and villains are until the end of the story when it's all written in history. And even
yeah,
then, it's gonna be richly debated over the course of eons and all that kinda thing. But then there's also like the journey we're going on as a human species is we're getting off this planet or we're all dying one way or the other. So I like
mm,
that there are multiple competing ways of trying to do that. I like that, there's a socialized aspect of it. And there's also like crazy people who are like, we're all going to Mars and we have
yeah.
millions of dollars ourselves. And you're
Oh,
like,
yeah,
well,
yeah.
cool. We'll
Yeah,
see where we're going.
I'm not against private efforts. I just
Mhm.
think the public efforts need to be there
Yeah.
to
I
kinda balance it out.
I was gonna say this earlier on your, fork in the road aspect, but
Yeah.
me and Gelmo always like because we're we're similar, but we're also like diametrically different in so many ways, and I think that's what makes us complementary as business partners and
Mm,
creative people. But he and I will get into these sort of rich debates about what's the right thing to do, and then inevitably we always after wasting a lot of time discussing the benefits of the two options, we say something like, "Por qué no los dos?" And then we're like, That was the answer all along. Why do I have to go down this path or that path? Let's just clear cut right through the middle of the woods and see where we land." Um, get the best of both worlds, so to speak. Maybe we'll come out between the 2 cities that the 2 paths released, and then we can develop a relationship with the village people in the middle, and then, by doing that, we'll get a better idea of the politics of the 2 potential, the big city castles, like this king likes that and this one doesn't like that. That's why they live so far apart, but the people in the middle are all the same, and we'll have more information, and we can choose who and how to court them, and that happens in, fantasy storytelling video games all the time. I love that.
right,
I
right.
like that approach, and, I think that's why we've been in business for so long together is just like it's, we're talking about teamwork earlier. Important to have multiple perspectives to arrive at new ideas. Like, there's your idea, there's his idea, and then there's
Yeah.
the idea that happens when you put them both together, and then there's
Yeah, yeah,
also
yeah.
neither, um, which I also like. There's option
Okay.
3, the what's behind door number 3. Like, I like that too. Um
There's an argument there that a good brainstorm should have at least 3 people.
Yeah. Well, even people like you who work in relative
Yeah.
isolation, you have your confidants that you go to and you're like, "Hey, man,
Oh,
what do you
yeah.
think of this? What do you think of that?" And
And that
that's
I think early access is a really good vehicle for that too,
yeah.
'cause you're getting feedback.
And you're getting feedback from people who are already invested in it. They're
Right.
like, yeah, they got skin in the game, literally.
Yeah.
But, I guess I wanted to ask, because we've talked before about your childhood and how, you kind of hey, people, if you're listening to this right now, you also have, like, 4 or 5 other episodes to go back and, like, get fully up to speed on the conversations between me and Mike. But you talked about how, you were influenced early on by, like, your mom kind of rewarding you for pictures you drew and putting them on the fridge and that kinda thing.
Oh, yeah.
But we never really talked about your career as an artist.
Mm.
So
Okay.
you studied art in university,
I did.
and then
Um,
you knew at that point, like, "I'm going to be a fine artist," when you started university, or did you tell me all about that?
oh, yeah, yeah. When I went to college, that was definitely my intention to be a full-time fine artist. Um, and this was a interesting thing because my whole life it was just like, oh, you're a great artist. You're good at art. You're going to win these awards and in school and this and that. And in my mind, all of that meant that being an artist is a legitimate career choice. Like there was nothing to push back until like way late in like high school. It was kind of like, people don't really make any money doing that. I
Mm.
was like, oh, it's too late now. I'm on the trajectory now. But and then there's the thinking of, well, I'm going to do it. I'm the exception. I can figure this out. And of course, there are those exceptions. Uh, so you have those examples of people, and yeah, I just went with it. Um, so studying art in uh, in college was really interesting because I was kind of doing more of my own art even in college than whatever they were asking me to do for the classes. I was like, oh, these classes are asking me to draw such and such thing in such and such way or paint or sculpt or whatever. I'm going to also spend most of my time in my dorm room carving Dungeons and Dragons figures.
Right.
So I'm not saying this is a recipe for success or anything at all. This is probably not. But because of those little Dungeons and Dragons figures I was sculpting in my dorm room, I got a job at it was basically my dream job, which was Ral Partha.
Mm.
I don't know if you're familiar with Ral Partha.
Nope. Don't
They
think so.
make Dungeons and Dragons figures. They're like the company you want to work for if you're into Dungeons and Dragons figures. And
I thought
I
it was
just
all
sent
Wizards of the Coast. I didn't. Not that I
maybe now, but this is the 90s. So
right.
back then, Ral Partha was still, a big name on the block. I just sent a few of my sculptures their way, and they were like, "Come for an interview." I went to Cincinnati, and they hired me, and I quit school. And like just as the summer was ending, I got a call, and they're like, "Well, we don't have the budget to hire you." I'm sure it was
Yeah.
presented to me better than that, and
It's the tree falling in the woods in front of you.
this is how I remember it, right?
Yeah.
Uh, I'm not here to malign Rail Partha. I'm sure they made the right decision business-wise for the investors and all that. Anyway, but for me, it was devastating. But I ended up going and moving to Chicago with a friend. We moved in together, little apartment, and I got a job at a nut. It's called Nuts on Clark. It's a nut packing, you know, little shop where they sell nuts and pretzels and other things that come in little bags. And I was just like packing the things into the bags. But that didn't last very long because I found another job, which was sculpting. Um, and it was just like looking through the phone book back. There is no internet at this point. There may have been an internet, but it just wasn't like the internet we know and love now. I didn't even have access to it.
Mm.
So I had an Apple II computer still at this point, um, with no modem. So uh, going through the phone book, I found I don't even remember what the original company was that I called, but they had some kind of job that would involve sculpting. And he said that they weren't hiring, but he knew a company that might be hiring. And he gave me the number for this toy company. And I called them and they're like, "How did you get this number?" And I told them, and I'm like, I do, you know, sculpt figures and stuff. And they're like, "Why don't you come down, show us what you got?" And they gave me the job, which was very nice.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah. So that was my first sort of. I wasn't graduated, but I had a job in the field that I was studying, which was sculpture at that time. Um, and it wasn't fine arts, but it was art. It was sculpting little figurines. It was something I was interested in, uh, and we actually did a lot of jobs for, like, we did Marvel back then. We did like Keebler. There was some Sesame Street. We did a McDonald's. Like, there was a lot of the McDonald's was like for Disney actually. It
Mhm.
was a McDonald's Happy Meal with Tarzan Disney characters in it. So there was a bunch of these pretty big corporations involved. I wasn't involved at that level. I was just the sculptor. I wasn't making the deals or anything, but definitely got a lot of hands-on experience in sculpting miniatures and stuff. Um, but what I saw was kind of the wake-up call there was we would get a lot of jobs where we were sculpting things and you know, making them in clay and then wax and then plastic and then painting them as basically we did the prototypes. But then there were jobs coming in where the prototype was already made and it was 3D printed. This is like the early to mid 90s where 3D printers were not something you could go buy at Target. This was like major industrial level stuff. But we saw it and it was coming in shipped to us, and it was like this thing that would have taken hours for some human being to work on. And that's the starting point for us. So we were just kind of sanding it and painting it and sending it. And those jobs were starting to become more frequent. And I was like, oh boy, uh, what are we going to do? And at that point, I started getting into computers. That was like the mid '90s. I had a computer. I was playing computer games, but I didn't really use any software other than Dazzle Draw, right? But by then, Photoshop was out, and I started working with that, and that kind of got me into computer graphics. And then um, I ended up getting a different job working on graphics, which was just it wasn't as uh, glamorous, but it was more like making the little graphic icons for internet sales pages. Like this product, uh, I take a picture of it. I you know adjust the color, get rid of the background,
Right.
and that was the product page. Image and things like that. And that was, like I said, not very glamorous, but definitely um, a viable thing in terms of work that I didn't see getting replaced too soon.
And you're
Unlike,
sort of like learning
yeah,
sales and marketing
I
by
wouldn't even
doing
say I
that.
was learning sales or marketing. I was just learning how to do computer graphics, right?
Interesting,
Like,
okay.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, it's way too early for sales and marketing for me. Although my mom, to bring her up again, I remember going into college as an artist. She was like, "You should take some marketing classes," and I'm like, "You're crazy, lady. I'm not going to need that."
Very wise, wise.
Yeah,
The crone in the story, the
uh,
wise old woman with the knowledge, the initiate, the high priestess. I
yeah.
like it. Yeah.
But so getting into computers and stuff, and then yeah, I did a bunch of different things like that. Uh, Mostly freelance at that point. Um, Brochure design, all any kind of graphic design stuff. But I kept trying to do more illustration and drawing work, but that's harder to come by. It was for me anyway. And But then if you wanna know how this transitioned into game design.
Well, I just wanna know your whole story.
Okay,
But
yeah, I mean,
mm,
having access to the computer at that point was really important, obviously, as a game design is something I've always been interested in, just theoretically. I would draw pictures of game designs and stuff and levels for Castlevania and Mega Man bosses and all these different things, but I didn't really know how to practically do that. But now with a computer, with Photoshop, I could at least produce graphics and stuff. And I remember using Flash to make very rudimentary games like Myst, kinda,
yeah.
where you just click on the image and it will bring you to a different area. So I kinda started working with some 3D softwares back then and just taking screenshots basically to make my game. Um, and then Game Maker was the big one for me because I had no programming knowledge at all. And Game Maker said, "You don't need it," basically.
Mhm.
Uh, and so it was just that easy to use drag and drop system they have. And they had the tutorial games, and you could just kinda take one of those and change the graphics, and you have a game. Um, but when you do that, you're gonna be I think the natural thing is like, "Well, I want the game to do this other thing that it doesn't do right now." And then you start, you know, getting into the programming and understanding how to change things and, uh, how to make things happen. And that became really, really interesting to me.
Mhm.
Um, and so I made a few games in Game Maker, uh, and then my brother, I remember he sent me 3D Game Studio, which was like the Unity of back then, early 2000s.
Right.
There was no Unity yet, but this was like it was like a complete 3D game package, with a level editor, a script editor, and a model editor. And I started getting into that, and that's where I'm stuck.
B but all the while, I just wanna, like, maybe
Yeah,
rewind a little bit here. So, you had these different jobs where you're making figurines
yeah,
and all taking pictures and making sales graphics of
yeah, yeah,
figurines and stuff as your
yeah.
primary income, but you're
Correct.
also painting and sculpting your own things in your own time
Yes.
and selling these? Or
Um, not yet,
okay,
not yet. Only we went to England in 2004,
okay.
and,
Why?
uh, well, um, the job I had resigned from,
Right.
and there was an opportunity. A guy I knew was making um, like a street vendor food truck type thing in England,
I mean,
and
you're already married, and how many kids
I'm
do you have?
married. I have
Just 1?
kids. 1 2 kids,
Wow. And you
and
moved to England with the whole family.
yes.
Man,
And
I
you know the secret, well, you know the secret maybe, I don't know. The secret of moving to another country?
to get someone else to pay for it.
Well, if you can do that, that's great,
Yeah.
uh, is buy the tickets.
Oh, I did do that.
Buy the tickets, everything else happens automatically.
Yes. That is I I moved to Denmark without a visa. I did not I
Wow,
had applied for the visa,
okay,
um, and then I was growing antsy waiting for it to happen, and
yeah,
then I was invited to go to Germany for Gamescom,
nice,
and then we go to Denmark at like, basically, we were gonna shoot it, like, Gamescom 1 week, shoot Realms Deep, within a couple of weeks after that.
right,
So just
right,
come stay until we are finished with Realms Deep and then, go back home until your visa gets here. And I bought a
yeah,
one-way ticket and I just stayed until my visa came in. And then I
nice,
shortly, like very shortly afterwards, like within a week or so, I think, guy named Fred, not Fred Schreiber, another Fred,
okay,
walked up to my desk and handed me he's like, "Hey, your visa came in today." And I was like,
Oh, nice.
"Awesome." And then we went and found me an apartment, and I just stayed in, for the
Fantastic.
rest of the time I was there. But yeah, you're 100% right. And it's the same way coming back also.
Okay. Really?
Like,
Uh,
well, I was so overwhelmed with, like, I know I have to go back home now, but, like, God, it's a lot, and then I just set a date, bought the tickets, and then I'm like, "No,
yeah,
I have this amount of time to make it happen." Boom. So, well, that's I think that's true with all decision making, but that's a very extreme version of it. But yeah,
it
just
is. It is.
once
But
you've
it
committed to the path that you're walking down.
have a date, you have a monetary commitment that you
Yeah,
obviously don't wanna lose,
right.
and yeah, you kinda just automatically will do the other stuff
So you
that you
take the
need to
wife
do.
and the 2 kids to England in
Yeah,
2004.
yep,
Yeah.
and then, I worked with this food truck for several months, and I was doing graphic design, designed the logo, I did some brochures and things like that, but then I was also working in the truck.
You went to Manchester
No, this
area
was up in Leeds. This is Leeds.
near like Geordie speaking kind of folk,
It's hard to understand them. I'll be
right?
very
Like that
blunt
halfway
about it.
between Scottish and English.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, there's a
and
wrestler named Pac who is
okay.
from that area. That's what I associate with it.
My wife is originally from England, so this was one of the big factors.
Oh, okay.
She was born in England,
Makes a big difference.
so
Yeah.
our kids are British citizens, and this just was great because we got them their passports and, basically, um, verified their Britishness.
Mhm.
Uh, I'm not a British citizen, but I am a permanent resident as long as I'm still married. So I got that through her. Um, but I think that was a big factor. Like if it was some other country, probably we wouldn't have done it. But this was where she was from. So the working in the food truck, I'm also, serving coffee and sandwiches and stuff like that, and driving. This is a fun one. Driving the truck, like it's a trailer, so you have to drive the pickup truck
Mhm.
with the trailer attached to it, and you have to
On
kind of
the wrong side of the road.
on the wrong side of the road, the stick shift, and and having to back that thing into the right position.
Right.
I still don't know how it ever got done. Like, I would do it every morning. I don't know how. It's just like, you try it like this, didn't work. Try it like that, didn't work. Try it. Oh, okay, close enough. So, but the reason I left that is because it shut down, and I'll tell you exactly why it shut down. And if you're listening, when you make coffee for people, people have a particular kind of coffee they want, right? Like,
Mhm.
this isn't just like, yeah, coffee, whatever. It's like, I want a latte, or I want a cappuccino, or it's all espresso drinks in England. They don't have a lot of the drip coffee there, which was another whole story. But when you make an espresso for someone, if you make it a double espresso, that's not something most coffee drinkers will just automatically be like, "Hey, I got a double espresso, wonderful." It's, like, really, really strong if you put 2 shots of espresso in there, and I don't think the people liked that. And I found out, like, I got a coffee from our own thing once, and I was like, "God, this is terrible. This is so strong. Like, what did you do?" And the guy's like, "Oh, I put 2 in." I'm like, "You can't do that. That's not how this works." And I remember calling the boss and like, "You can't," and he's like, "It's fine." Anyway, it wasn't fine. The thing shut down. I'm pretty sure that's why. Uh, so I'm out of a job again in
Right.
England, and I ended up getting a job at the same place I was working for back in the States. They
Mhm.
had a branch over there, and I'm working for them for a while, and then the boss from the States comes for a visit, and he's like, "What are you doing here?" I guess no one told. And I'm like, "I'm working here." And he's like, "You're coming back to America." So that was my England adventure.
How did that tie
Um,
into the art though?
I'm still doing graphic design
Okay.
and basically stuff for catalogs and websites, um, and some product packaging, stuff like that. But while I was there, I did produce several paintings, and I felt like, okay, these are different, and these are pretty good, and I'm gonna go and see if anyone in London likes my paintings. So I went to a bunch of different galleries, and this one gallery was like, "Yeah, we'll put them in our next group show if you want." I'm like, "Sounds good." So there's a thing called group shows,
This
right?
is like
I
where people bid on art pieces
no,
that are on display, or
no, not bidding necessarily. I mean, people can buy stuff, but basically, you don't have to earn the whole gallery and fill it with your work. You can just submit one or two pieces, and there's like 20 artists doing that, so they fill up the gallery with a bunch of other artists' work
yeah.
along with yours. And it, I think it's a pretty common thing, but this was my first experience even approaching galleries since I had lived in Chicago when I got zero interest back then. Uh, when I went on my attempts to reach the gallery system in Chicago. Um, but in London, they were just really friendly about it. It was weird. It was like, "Oh, you're from America? Okay." That to them was enough of a selling point. Where in America, they're like, "You're from the suburbs? Get out of here, kid." "Oh, you're from London? Oh, here we have a space for you." So it would have been different.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, I think that was an interesting thing. So I gained a little confidence, and when I came back, I joined an artists guild, which is just like a bunch of artists that put on their own shows every month or every few months.
Right.
Um, and that was a great thing for me in terms of fine arts. Um, forgot where I'm going with this. And I won a few of those shows, and actually, uh, one of my pieces got the best in show, and it was really interesting experience for me because I was new to this whole art scene. Um, they were announcing the winners, and they were like, honorable mentions, third place, second place, first place, and it wasn't my painting. And I was like, oh well, you know, better luck next time. And then they said, and best in show, and it was my piece. I didn't know there was a best in show. I thought first place was first place. Like, who knows this until you're actually in it? There's a thing called best in show, which is better than
Like a
first
dog.
place. So that was really exciting for me. It was like the second show I participated in, and I got best in show. I was like, this is the best thing ever. This is not a money making thing yet at all. Um, but then my piece was the best in show, so it went to like a regional. There's now like a bunch of different artists guilds, and they're all taking the best in show pieces from that year, and they're putting them into one big show called the best of the best.
Mhm.
And my piece got third place in the best of the best, and I thought that was pretty neat. Um, and then I started getting little solo shows. Like there was a coffee shop in our town, and they just put up my work for like a month or two, and that's when I sold my first like major sale. I think that's kind of where sales happen more often than not.
Mhm.
It was for me anyway. And I remember selling a piece, and it was the first time I sold a piece for the amount I was asking for.
That's interesting.
Yeah. Uh, usually, and it's kind of like that overreaching thing. Like I would base the price on how long it took me, for instance. That seemed to me to make sense, but in the art world, that's not how art is sold. Right. The price is very much arbitrary if you look at how many hours went into that piece. Some artwork may have taken hundreds of hours, but it doesn't sell for that much. And some artwork could take very small amount of time, but it can sell for hundreds of thousands of dollars. And
It's very much a type of thing that the value is not the work put in, it's the
yeah,
final product, and, of course, then there's
the
what people
name,
make of it. Yeah,
yeah, a lot to do with the name. And but to build your name, you have to know what you're doing. It's not. I'm not dismissing this at all.
right.
It and I'm not saying it's fully arbitrary. It's like it's complex, is what it is. And to the casual observer, which to be very frank, I'm a very much a casual observer of the art world. Like I'm an artist. I make lots of fine arts, but I'm not participating in that world
I found
in
that
the way.
the best artists, or actually just anything, are the people who don't participate in the bullshit.
You kind of have to if you want to make a living at it, though.
I think you can be, like, peripheral to it, like, you don't have to
You
fully
can,
immerse yourself into look, if you make up your mind, "I'm gonna be a fine artist, and what I'm gonna do is just fully be immersed in, like, the politics of art."
yeah,
Yeah, okay, you could sell your pieces for more money and stuff, but, like,
right.
does that make you a better artist, or does that just make you, like, one of the assholes who's doing the political stuff? And I'm not saying they're all bad, there's probably great people who do that, but, it's the same thing with video games.
Yeah.
Like, I got too close to the sun of the
Mm,
corporate machine of video games,
yeah,
and then I
yeah.
was
I
just
know
like,
what you're saying.
I don't want this. I don't want this at all.
The same teacher that taught me about vision and strategy that I mentioned very early on in this discussion also talked about there's no art world. It's a bunch of art villages.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm not participating in the mainstream art village of galleries and museums and all that and academia.
Lovecraft wasn't
But
participating in the
exactly,
mainstream either,
yeah.
yeah.
Um, and so to me, it does seem arbitrary how things are priced and how, but I'm sure there's logic and reason to it within that scope of that world. But blimey, I
Mm.
have no idea. And trying to get into that sort of academic and you know gallery culture is something I wasn't particularly good at, or and something I wasn't even willing to try very hard at because I saw it as, and this is not a dig at the art community. It's more it didn't align with what I wanted to do.
Right.
For me, it had a lot to do with how you talk about and how you explain your art to people. And I was just kind of adamant, like the best way to learn about my art is to look at it. Like I'm not going to be able to put into words what I was doing because the thing I was doing was that.
Right. Like,
And I
if I was gonna if I could explain it in words, I wouldn't have painted it, I would have explained it
right,
in words.
right, exactly, and that
Yeah.
doesn't cut it.
Yeah, that's how I
It's
feel too,
absolutely
like
100% true, but it doesn't cut it in
like,
that
why did you write this song? It's like, well, if
light.
I coulda just told you the idea I was trying
Yeah.
to convey to you, I wouldn't have written a song. Like,
But on the good side, I was selling work. It
yeah,
wasn't necessarily enough to, go full time at all,
right,
but it was like, "Oh, I'm getting decent money for these pieces, and if I could sell these maybe once a month or twice a month, I could do this full time." But that amount requires a lot of it. It sounds so dumb, but it would require more time than I was able to commit to it, right? So it's kind of a you would have to divide your time up between making the work and selling the work in a way that wouldn't work because the amount of time I spent on a painting was a lot. It was months. It wasn't these weren't things I could make in a week or a bunch of them in a few weeks. It was like each painting was a very different thing, and when I was done, I was like, done. I didn't have another idea. I'd have to think and, look through my sketchbooks, and it was like a big process for each one, and I noticed the artists that were selling a lot tended to produce work in a body, and this was one of the advices they gave, like, "Don't think of a painting, think of a body of paintings, think of a whole show worth of paintings," and I hated that. I wasn't good at that, and I didn't wanna do that. I wanted this one painting to be the best painting ever, you know,
Yeah.
until it was done, and then the next painting would be the best painting. I couldn't do that with paintings where, "Oh, these paintings are all about this topic," whatever. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just not how I operated, and I couldn't make it work financially to sustain what I was trying to do. And although I could sell art, I had to be in front of you with the work, and I could convince you to buy my painting if you were standing there with me in front of the painting. That works, but that takes a lot of effort and a lot of time and a lot of persuasiveness, you know? And it just sucked me dry. I'd come home from those things and be like, "I never wanna talk to another person as long as I live. Just lock me in a room and just whatever." And I went into writing books, children's books, and illustrating those, and it was pretty much the same thing. I had a bunch of books to sell now. I didn't have to produce each book individually, right? You can make one book and print 1,000 of them, but it was still the same dynamic. I had to be there. I had to be explaining to people why this book was important, and they would buy them, but it's like, I'm not a salesperson. I am not a salesperson.
I
That's what
learned
kept coming back to me, like,
I learned a lot of valuable salesmanship skills
yeah,
that I have used later in many
yeah,
different aspects of my life. Like I think back to like going to game conventions and working the booth and like showing people, these are the different games we have, and they're like overwhelmed by all the choices. And I'm like,
mm,
but then you see a guy and you're like, you look like a Wrath guy. You look like you're gonna
yeah,
play
yeah,
Wrath Aeon of Ruin. And he's like, I don't know what that is. I'm like, trust me, it's what you want.
yeah,
I'm
yeah,
gonna take it. I'm actually gonna sneak you through the back to the computer because there's one free, but you
nice,
just all these other people, they're rip out guys, but you're a Wrath guy. And presenting it in that way is often really good. But where I learned this from was I worked in this sandwich shop when I was like 16
mm,
s till I was 18, I think. Until I was 18, I think my 18th birthday is when they went out of business. So,
ah,
that was fun. Right after my 18th birthday, something like that. But people would come in and then they'd look at the menu and they would be like, "Oh, it's just I know I want a sandwich, but I don't know what kinda sandwich I want." And I just "You you're a Reuben guy, I can tell."
yeah, yeah,
Over time, I got good at that where it's like, "You know what you are? You're a chicken panini guy. I can just tell. I know." And then most of the time, suggestion works.
yeah,
So, let's just say I was at an art show and I'm not you. I
mm,
didn't make the art, but I would be like, I'd see somebody coming by, and if my goal is to sell your art, I'd see them
yeah,
looking at something else. I'm like, "That's really nice, but what's really interesting is this Schmidt painting over here."
mm,
And then, you know, b you like, get overwhelmed by talking to so many different people, but I would be like, "Just look at it for a second. I have to go do something," and then go away.
mm,
See what they make of it, and then, you're gonna get a lot of people that, like, get disinterested or embarrassed or
sure,
whatever.
sure,
There's always gonna be the one that's like,
stays
I gotta
behind.
Bet you I think you really awoke something in me with this, like, how much do you think he's gonna sell it for? Be like, "Well, I'll tell you a secret. He'll probably go lower than the listed price." But this is a there's a lot of other people here, today that have, they've been thinking about buying this, and I just don't know. If you offered him more than the listing price, I bet you he'll just part with it. Like, but what you probably wanna be quick about
What
it.
you're pointing out to me is something that just is absolutely true, at least for me,
Yeah.
because I did sales at different companies. I did some retail.
Mhm.
We would do conventions, and I could sell stuff. I could have these conversations.
Mm.
But when it's my painting for my book, I am a wreck. I am a and I could do it. I could work my way through it and sell those things, but it drained me in a way
Right.
that selling other people's products didn't. Like, oh,
Yeah.
I just sold $200 worth of videos. I don't care. That
It's not
didn't elevate
natural.
me at all. I'm still getting paid the normal price that I get paid.
Right.
Or, oh, they don't want these. I don't care. They don't have to like that. I don't particularly like that either, maybe. I don't know. But when it's my painting, oh, you don't like it? Okay. Crying. Like I'm crying. Why don't you like it? I wouldn't ask them, but
Yeah.
inside I was eternally in this turmoil. And yeah, what I noticed with video games is I don't have to be there. I don't have to tell you why it's a good idea for you to buy a video game.
Interesting.
Video games, people want video games, right?
Mhm.
It's a thing people enjoy. And with a painting, like, people do enjoy art, but I don't have to explain why it's important or why it's beneficial for that person. Either they're gonna like it or they're not gonna like it, that's fine.
Yeah.
I don't have to tell them. Beyond just describing the game, I don't have to be there. The store page does that. Like, there's a market, there's an active, huge market for video games that just doesn't exist for the fine arts.
It hypothetically, it could, but what's interesting about the
I
video
should say
games.
it doesn't exist, but it's harder to get into that world where
Yeah.
other people are selling your art, basically.
I feel like, the trouble with video games is, like, someone's walking into a video game store to buy a video game, obviously, they intend to leave with a video game,
Yeah,
or a movie gallery or something like that,
right,
they intend to leave with something, of entertaining value. It's not so much getting them to buy a game, like, if you're the shop owner, Steam, they don't need to convince you which game to buy
right.
on.
There's
Yeah,
yeah,
Valve is gonna get a paycheck as long as you buy something, and you will.
yeah,
But it's getting your, and, we'll use the analogy, your painting
mhm,
amongst all the other paintings in this gallery of millions of paintings to be the one that they leave with today.
yeah.
Um, yeah, I was
Yeah,
listening to, I think it was Quentin Tarantino and another gentleman who was a director and friend of his. I can't remember his name right now, but they were talking about working in the video store in
mhm,
LA. Um, and there were like the mom and pop shop, and then there were other like larger, blockbuster style places
right,
around. But people came to them because, they'd come in and they're like, "I know I wanna watch a movie," and, you kinda get to know the clientele, like, what do they like? What are they,
right,
and they're like, "Well, I wanna," Top Gun looks good, but they're like, "Well, we rented out all the Top Guns already, but here's something else." It wouldn't have to be the newest thing, it would just have to be something that's new to you, like,
right,
so that, and
right.
that since they knew all the movies, they're like, "Yeah, well, have you seen, this?" And the person is going to leave with a movie, like, that's the deal, to watch, to rent, whatever.
What was that one? It was pre-Top Gun. It was like one of these fighter jet movies. Top Gun
Mm.
kinda took the fighter jet movie genre into the mainstream.
I think I know exactly what you're talking about, but I gotta look up the name real fast. Um, doo 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 doo. So obviously Top Gun's number 1.
Yeah,
To we're going pre-Top Gun. Uh, dude, good lord, it's not Iron Eagle, is it?
Yep,
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
Iron Eagle.
yeah. Yeah, Iron Eagle comes to mind. Iron Eagle
Yeah.
2, I think, was
I don't know if it's
1994.
actually pre-Top Gun, but
And then
it
there's the
seems like
greatest
it
fighter jet
should
movie
be.
of all time, Independence Day.
Okay, I don't know if I would call that a fighter jet movie, but
But it is. It's just
it has
it's just the
elements.
enemy's different. The
It
but
has elements.
it's a fighter jet movie, but they're not fighting the
Yeah.
Ruskies, they're fighting the alien.
I would include helicopter movies in this genre.
Black Hawk Down.
I was thinking like Blue Thunder
Okay, yeah, Blue
and
Thunder came to mind too.
Airwolf, which was
Yeah,
TV, but still,
yeah.
yeah. But yeah,
Cool.
what was Iron Eagle before Top Gun though?
Yeah, I
Is
think
my
so.
memory accurate here? 86 for Iron Eagle.
Top Gun was 86 also, so they
Oh,
were
interesting.
right around
Yeah.
the same
Anyway,
time. Yeah.
um, yeah, I think the big difference for me, and this may be different for other game developers, and different for other artists, and different for other children's book authors, but for me, I didn't have to be there to sell my games. And for me, that was the sign, like, this is what I need to be doing, because I can't I can't be in a life where I have to sit there and convince people that what I'm doing is important. That is soul draining to me.
Right, you need to outsource that job to someone who likes doing it.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Just I mean, like, imagine how many more games you would sell if you put in the same amount of effort to as you did with it selling a piece of art. You know, considering that you sell games
Right.
without trying,
Well,
imagine
it's not like
imagine how many more you could
I'm
sell.
swimming in money either. It's just,
That's what I'm
uh,
saying.
yeah. I But I think going to a game convention, I did go to PAX East in 2023,
Mm,
and I didn't have a booth or anything, but the booths at these things are outrageously expensive for a solo developer.
I'm
So it's kind
I'm
of
sure.
a
Yes.
kind of a that's a different challenge, and, I don't know if I'm up for that challenge, to be honest, but,
The
uh,
move is to do exactly what you did with the art guild, and it's to get a
yeah,
bunch of gamers together to rent a large table
yeah,
or
yeah,
area and then
that's good.
s put several laptops out,
Right.
or the, excuse me. Another example of that would be to have a publisher who does that for you, which is
Yes.
basically a same thing. It's a guild of developers working together to be able to afford in
Right.
its ideal format, you know,
Yeah,
it,
yeah,
a bunch of developers who are making similar enough games who pull their money together under the leadership of the publisher themselves to do
mhm.
exactly just that.
Yeah,
Um,
no, that's really good. I was just having a conversation with a friend who talked about, and I can't remember the terminology he used, but it's like a group of small businesses that pool together to buy products
yeah,
at the wholesale prices that a huge company like Walmart might buy them at, so they can be competitive, and I never knew that existed. But yeah, that
there's
could be yeah, that
yeah.
could be done in gaming as well.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
and this
try to do
is
that with podcasts too. It's like, you know, if there's another podcast, several other podcasts in a network together, when you're making ad sales, you don't need to sell them
mm,
on the viewership of any individual podcast. You could say, "This is how many different people we as a network, uh, you know, reach."
that's
And
great.
so it's not just about, like, getting your product on the Joe Rogan show for a lesser price. You could be on all of these different shows with different people who
Mhm,
listen, you know, different things, with the same exact ad or even personalized to each individual audience, but you know, for one price.
right,
Mm.
right.
And yeah, I think that's wicked smart. I think that's super cool. But
Yeah,
I find that at conventions, like for instance, if I don't want to fork out the money to go to a convention with a booth, and like yeah, I've seen all the way from the indie guy who rented a arcade machine looking thing, you know, in the
mhm,
gallery of those, to THQ Nordics booth, with
Right.
a wrestling ring built in front of it and a loft with like, you know, lighting and everything and security personnel and just, literally forking out hundreds of thousands of dollars on a booth for a convention. But that stuff works for a reason. There's a reason why they can do it. Um,
Yeah.
and I would just say, like, honestly, just walking around and talking to people, engaging in conversations and being like, "Hey, here's a business card with the Q code for my game on it." Because when you leave the convention, like, when a
Mhm.
person leaves the convention, they're gonna have the memories and the things that they saw and everything, but it's so much that when they get home and they empty their bag of all the shit they got,
Yeah.
and your business card is in there with a QR code that they can scan and then engage with it at their own pace, that is more likely to translate into a sale.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah, that makes sense. I did go to that PAX East. I had
mm,
a bunch of business cards printed. I handed exactly one of those business cards to one person in that whole thing.
the move is to
Yeah.
buy pins or lanyards or something like that, even if it's not cards, but flyers work too.
Yeah.
Um, give something of value that is
Mm.
low cost to you and free to people
Yeah.
because they want lanyards, they want pins, they want
I
stickers, that kinda shit.
it's
Yeah,
it's different because I've been at conventions where I have a booth,
right.
not gaming conventions, though.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah. Yeah.
oh, in Milwaukee, there was one actually, but it was very small, and, it didn't really translate into the same kind of environment as the PAX East did. But I just wanted to get a lay of the land. I was just kinda looking around, like, kinda dumbfounded. I didn't have a booth, so I didn't feel like I can be handing people my business card. That's not my job. I'm a visitor, like, in my head, I was not able to
Mhm.
correspond those 2 things. Like, I'm a visitor, I don't have a booth. How can I give you my business card? It doesn't make sense. So,
I'm
maybe
always
next time.
hustling. Always hustling, dude. I would be, I would go to, like, a wrestling show and then just be handing people, like, "Hey, have you
Yeah,
heard of this fucking game, Phantom
yeah,
Fury?" Like that. Same as, concerts, whatever. Wherever people who buy games, which are most people, especially young people,
yeah.
are, you know, and it's even you could make the argument, it's more novel to have the one and only video game booth at a music festival than it
Mm,
is to be one of the 10,000 ones at, Gamescom or at, PAX or something like that.
right?
So and then
Yeah,
the people are there, like, to check out music, and then they're gonna be like, "Whoa, a video game. I like video games. Let's go check out that one video game."
right.
Whoa, and if it's like a shooter or something, Doom kinda shit, it's like, "Man, this is metal, bro. I'm here to see Slipknot, and I wanna shoot some demons now." Like, yeah. Totally works.
I could see
Uh,
that working. Yeah.
yeah, it's interesting, man, like, just the psychological aspect of making sales there, and I totally get your point of view of, like, getting yourself in the right mindset. I would
Mhm.
just be, like, sitting at a pub somewhere, and then see a group of people walk in, younger men usually, and I'm like, "Hey, you guys wanna buy some video games?" Like, I gotta I've got cards and everything, and then the next thing you know,
Nice.
they're all moving to your table, and they're like, "This guy makes video games." I'm like, "Yeah, man. I mean, we
Cool.
got a whole bunch of them. Like, here's 5 different business cards. Give them to your friend. Here's a stack of 20. I bet you what, I'll buy you a drink. I'll buy you guys all around if you pass these out to everyone in the bar." Like,
Nice.
yeah. But, that's a personality type too, and I feel like that to me, that kinda stuff isn't draining because it's kinda naturally
Yeah,
where I see myself, I enjoy that kinda thing. But I if you're not an extrovert,
yeah.
that is draining to you, so
Oh,
you
yeah.
need to
And
you need
that's
to
the other
team
thing,
up with
like,
an extrovert.
if I put myself in the same kind of situation where I have to talk about my games
Mhm,
in an effort to sell them, right?
mhm,
It's different than, like, you're asking me questions about my game. This is a natural conversation. I don't find this draining at all. But if my goal is to sell you something, that that creates that conflict that haven't been able to tolerate for very long.
Just a reminder to our listening audience right now, Cyclopean available currently on Steam in early access. It is an amazing game. I really enjoy it, and you should buy it for the low, low price of
$9.99.
$9.99. Do you think you could get a better game than this for $9.99? Think again. Uh, Best value of $10 you will spend anywhere, anytime this month, I promise. Or, well, I can't say or your money back. Or
Yes, he
write me an
plays in less
angry
than 2
comment in the
hours.
YouTube. Write an angry comment in the YouTube.
There's a free demo.
Yes, there is a free
There's a
demo.
free demo.
Yeah.
I like the free demo.
Don't even buy
It
don't
does.
play the demo, just buy it.
Yeah,
Trust me.
for sure.
Yeah,
I
don't play the demo, don't try it out, pay the $10, support your local indie game developer.
I do like the demo idea though, because
I do too, I do too.
it's just I think a lot of people buy it without bothering with the demo,
Mm.
but it's sort of just an extra security net there psychologically. Like, I think the game is good enough that the demo can kind of sell it. So if you do try it and you don't like it, obviously you don't have to buy it. But I think most people who have tried it tend to enjoy it, and
But you'll be happier if you buy it. You will feel better, you'll sleep better tonight if you buy this game.
and you can transition your demo save directly to the full game save.
That's actually really nifty. I think that the interesting part about demos is that they oftentimes ward away potential buys, but they tend to ward away buys from people who are going to complain about the game. Like, they'd be
Yeah,
like, "Oh, this isn't what I expected." Whereas, like,
right.
if you bought the demo, you would have known that, and you wouldn't have bothered me with this information
Yeah,
anyway.
I think it's a good point. And
Yeah.
the goal, like with Steam at least, is to get those positive reviews. That's a major factor in the visibility of the game. So
Yes.
uh, negative reviews, obviously, you don't want. So the demo kind of helps shield the game from negative reviews in a way.
You know what's harder than getting people to review a video game, ironically,
Mm,
is getting them to leave 5 stars on a podcast on whatever app they're listening to currently. I have had a lot like, I was, for the longest time doing the show, I didn't like to, because every podcast has, like, that, "Remember to like, scrub," and all that kinda thing, and I
yeah,
was so
yeah,
uncomfortable doing that because 'cause I'm like, "If you like it, you'll do that," and it turns
yeah.
out, no, you won't, because
No, people don't.
well, also, it's sort of a passive thing. It's like, a podcast is just playing potentially on your phone or in another window on your computer while you're doing something else, and it's like,
Right.
it's and then the next thing automatically starts, and you're like, "Oh, I really enjoyed that." So, be like, incentivizing someone to, like, be in the moment for a second,
Mm,
hit 5 stars on the thing, and for me, more importantly, like, click the share button and tell that friend that
yeah,
likes this, that also would be interested in this topic to listen to the show also.
yeah, I
That's
could see that.
the most important thing. Um, I think that's the same with video games. I'm like, they don't like. There's so many people are just like and quietly enjoying things by themselves. Like, don't enjoy it by yourselves.
Mm,
Climb to the rooftop of your building and shout to the world that you love this game so much.
yeah,
Um, that's difficult. That's getting people out of their comfort zones.
yeah. Because now you're going public with an opinion, and that opinion can be scrutinized, right? And that's
Yeah,
that's an uncomfortable thing for some people. And
for sure.
I'm even uncomfortable with that with some games I might like and be like, "Do I need everyone to know that I like this? I don't know." Uh, but
I've never written a bad review in my life.
yeah,
I just don't review it if I don't like it. That's the punishment you get for me not liking it is that I didn't review it. If I like it, best review ever, 5 stars. It's a
I like I
totally
like I like to write negative reviews of games that I legitimately didn't like,
mhm.
but are otherwise so overwhelmingly positive that I know mine won't really make a dent. Like, I don't wanna put a little developer who has 10 reviews out of business, like, that's not my goal.
Yeah.
But when there's a huge popular game, I do wanna provide an opinion that might not go with the mainstream, but
When you have safety in
yeah,
numbers, that's when you feel good about. It's like a being on a firing squad for you.
I don't
Don't
mind
know
saying
that
that
my bullet's the
unpopular.
one that killed them.
Yeah. I don't
Yeah.
mind saying that unpopular thing because in that situation, because I don't think it's going to harm the developer who's already made millions and millions of dollars. Uh, but it's an observation that might um I don't know. Maybe I'm just being a jerk. I don't know.
I just I don't know, I just don't like being negative. Like, I will tell someone, like, if I don't like something, you
Yeah.
know? But I don't see the point in, like, adding to that on the internet. First of all, I mean, if I'm gonna put my time and effort into something, it's not gonna be tearing anything down. I don't really care to
Right.
do
Right.
that. But, like, I'm not gonna go write a negative review of Doom Eternal because just because I don't like it. But I
Mm.
feel like me
I
writing
did
a
that.
review is me saying I recommend this, like, I think this is
Yeah.
good, it's worthwhile, and
Yeah.
even if it's not like, the rating system is difficult for me also, because I kinda feel
Mm.
like the question I'm trying to answer is not, "How much will you like this game?" Because ultimately, a lot of people are going to filter sales by 4 stars and up or whatever, you know?
Right.
So I'm not like I'm not trying to tell you how much I think you're gonna like it, I'm trying to tell you this is worth your time,
Mm.
you know? Like, this is a buy and this is a don't buy. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, the why can come, through. I guess I'd also have a podcast to put my opinions out there, and I don't feel the need to do that on Steam.
Okay,
Necessarily.
that's fair. I've also been the on the receiving end of negative reviews, so I feel like I should be able to do that too.
I think a negative review that's like criticism, like I
Yeah,
think these things need to
absolutely.
be this one way or whatever. But
Absolutely.
I genuinely like have read some nasty reviews.
Yeah.
Nasty.
No, no, mine are try to stick with the facts and that it's usually only if the game does not do what it promised,
Yeah, I
at
think that's
least,
fair.
or what it seems to promise. And I try to explain it as clear as I can why I didn't get the joy out of this experience that most people have, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know what else to do with that information. Like I played this game for an hour, 2 hours. I have an opinion. What do I do with that opinion? There it is. It's the review, you know?
I just think of people who leave negative reviews, like, not not criticism in the
Right.
good way, but I mean, just
Oh,
anything that's just "This sucks,
yeah.
uninstall, don't play,
Yeah, no,
whatever."
no, no.
I
No,
just
I'd
think
never do
those
that.
people are losers.
Yeah,
Like,
for sure.
I don't know, you're a loser, and the
Well,
thing is
they're
that
looking for rage bait. It's rage
you're
bait,
you're
basically.
causing damage to
Yeah,
someone trying to do something with minimal effort, and that I can't stand. Like, I
yeah,
really don't like it. Um, like, someone here is trying to do something, if you're leaving, like you said earlier, like, if you're leaving a negative review on something that, like, totally lied about what it is, like, this is a lie, or if they promise this, this, and that, it doesn't work, it crashes as soon as you open it, I understand that. But, yeah, otherwise, you're just being a dick. You're a loser, you know? Do something, go outside, plant a tree or something. Get a hobby that isn't this.
I've as a developer, like I said, been on the receiving end of
Mm.
some negative reviews.
What's the worst
Uh,
review you ever got?
well, I always read them,
Mhm.
and if it's a negative review, and if it gives me information, I find that actually super helpful. I really wish people would go into the forum and post a discussion topic instead, but that's fine because I read those too. Uh, but the negative review is there, and I have been able to turn some around by addressing the actual issue. Because if there's an issue, I want to know what it is, and I want to. If it's something that doesn't go against the vision of my game, I do want to fix that. I do want to address it. And a bunch of those people, I'd respond and say, "Look, that's actually really good feedback. Here's what I'm going to do. Uh, would you consider reviewing your review?"
Yeah.
something like that. And a bunch of them have been very kind and did change their negative to either they removed it or they put a positive, which is nice.
I think that's a good
Um,
practice that not enough
yeah,
developers actually engage in. Is just like saying like, "Hey, I fixed that. Could you,"
right,
even
right.
if it's not now positive, at least change it to reflect the fact that I have fixed that.
Yeah,
And honestly, most people who are doing that like negative asshole thing where they're
yeah.
doing it on purpose, but maybe they do have like a nugget of information that is useful to you in there. As soon as they are directly engaged, like with the fact that there's another person over there,
Mhm.
they usually crumble. Where they're like, "Oh, like I've heard,
There's two breeds.
right, right," or they double
There's the
down.
breed that will respond and say, "Okay, actually, this is what I didn't like about it."
Mhm,
Because a lot of times the negative review is just like it's just negative. There's no takeaway. There's no
right,
nugget. It's just like this sucks. I hate you, and I'll be like, "Why do you hate me?" And they'll be like, "Oh, okay. Actually, I hated it because blah 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 blah." Blah." I'm like, "Okay, actually, that's really good. Thank you for that information. Sorry you didn't like the game. Have a nice life." And then there's the people who they don't respond. They leave the review as is. They don't respond. They don't care. They don't want to engage.
right.
I don't know why. They're there to test us.
Yeah,
They're they're out there, man.
I just respond with like, well, if like, "I hate you," like, "That's interesting because I love you." Like, I
Yeah.
really love you a lot.
Okay. So don't engage, with logic, but engage with emotion.
I think so. Yeah,
Maybe. I haven't tried that. I honestly haven't tried that.
yeah. I
I
had a
don't know wanna have a relationship with that person.
bully in high school who was like, being a bully, and he's just like,
Mm,
"Look, like, why are you looking at me like that?" or whatever, and, like, "What are you, gay or something?" And I
mm.
literally just, like, stood up, looked him right in his eyes, and I said, "You have beautiful eyes, and that's why I'm looking at you." Never spoke to me again. I believe that that
I
same guy went to jail for stabbing his friend with a spoon later, but
oh, damn.
he never spoke to me again after that.
With a spoon.
Yeah,
Yikes.
not gonna say any names, but yeah,
No.
that's all it took
Please
was
don't.
just like, basically like giving him the equal, like same level, opposite input.
I can see you saying that and getting away with it.
Um, I just, like most of the time, folks that are being shitty and negative is because they're miserable, and it's like, make their
Yeah.
day a little better. Like, oh, you're miserable. That's sad. Tell me about it. What's wrong? What's going on with you?
Yeah.
How's your dad? How's your relationship with your mom?
Mm.
Like, it's usually something like that. Like, well, hey, hang in there, buddy. It's gonna be okay. I believe in you. Maybe no one else does, but I do. So you can do it. Just take that review down, please. It's not nice. Does it remind you
Oh,
of how your dad talked to you?
I'm
Is
gonna
that why
think
you talk to
about
people
that.
like that? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Hey,
it's
you don't
good.
clean the toilet seat because you saw your dad treat his toilet seat like that, right? He just peed all over it and didn't put the lid down. Oh.
I have no response.
People, I feel so seen. I feel like
Yeah,
someone finally understands me
there
in
you go.
the comment section of a indie game on Steam. Amazing. No, and then there's how much effort you really put into that too, but
Mm.
I yeah, I really do like the game. Like, I
Like,
genuinely loved playing Cyclopean all the way through. I felt bad because by the time I reviewed it, I had already played it, and so, like, I think I left a positive review on Steam, and then it says, like, 0 hours played or
oh,
something.
right.
So I need to
Yeah,
jump back in and play more just to get that
that
to make
happens.
sense.
That
Yeah,
happens. You can also explain it played prior to release or something. Helps.
right.
'Cause there's a brand of internet person who will find these things and comment on them.
Right. Yeah. I
This guy only played 20 minutes.
Well,
Um,
there's if you only played 20 minutes and you had something negative to say, it's like, well, how could you say it was
yeah.
bad
Yeah.
if you only played 20 minutes. And honestly, this game takes more than 20 minutes to like, for me anyway, to like get to understand what's going on.
Right.
Because
For sure.
I went a long time not understanding very fundamental things about the game and then being like,
Okay.
oh, and I'm not used to playing roguelike
Maybe
games.
if you'd read the action log.
Right, maybe if I played the demo and all that stuff. But I didn't get mad at the game or the designer. I was like,
Okay.
that's one of the most fundamental pieces of advice I've ever heard about games is that when something wrong happens or when someone dies or whatever,
Yeah.
it should be in such a way that they blame themselves and not the game.
For
You
sure.
know, and that's a good principle to work off of. It's like if they're pissed because, at you for something they did, ignore them. But if they're pissed at
Mm.
you because of something you did, all right, well, that's fair
That's
criticism, or at
critical
least worth
feedback for sure.
right,
That's good.
yeah. So I feel like, if you die in this game, I don't think, "Oh, the game designer screwed me." I think,
Mm.
I need to get better at the game. I need to figure out what I did wrong so that I can do it again next time. Um, and usually, I mean, Crash is exempt.
Yeah.
But what makes people mad is when they've made a lot of progress and then they're dead and they have
Yeah.
to do it all over again.
Of
That
course.
sucks.
Of course.
So avoiding that as much as possible at least for me is pretty big. Like
No,
I
this
don't want someone to be
game.
mad at me because they didn't know how to pre-save or to quick save, for instance.
Yeah. Yeah. This game has manual saves only right now.
And I don't like that. But
I
I noticed.
I was originally going to have an autosave plot,
Mm,
and it was causing some issues.
yeah.
But I believe I've resolved those issues. I think the design, because I found out that those issues happened not only during the autosave, but if you saved and then loaded and saved in a different slot. It was anytime you're using multiple slots. That's when those issues happen. And I was able to fix that. So now I should be able to reintroduce the autosave, so people don't have that tons of progress and then dying and then having to redo stuff. Because yeah, I don't want to do that either to people.
When it comes to like tutorial teaching people how to interact with the game
Yeah,
and think about their interactions with the game, like this is one of those things where I do sort of look at the great examples of like this works every time. And
yeah,
so like for instance, Stellar Valkyrie, I'm very much thinking, I've thought about this game for 5 years at this point. Like I want it to be presented in such a way that a child could pick it up and
mm,
play it. Or someone who's never played a video game could play it, which is interesting because being in the Doom engine, it does have if you just pick it up with no tutorial, it requires that you have played another first person shooter, probably like Doom at least once before, so that E is interact, etc., without us telling you that.
yeah.
So what we did was we had Gelmo's mom play it. So we just found
Okay.
an older lady who does not play video games at all, hand her the demo and be like, "What do you think of this?"
Mm,
How, you just play it, and and Gelmo's like writing down everything she does as she's going.
nice. Okay.
Like this she didn't understand this, that, or whatever. And
Okay.
then I'm like, okay, and this is how I am going to make the tutorial around what someone who's never touched a game before
Okay.
like this would do. So I think about like Donkey Kong 64, or like the stuff that I played as a kid, where when you walk into a new area, it like I'm not saying Stellar Valkyrie is gonna do all of these things, but, it stops and it's like, "Okay, hey, this is what you need to do," and,
Mm,
zooms in on an object and like, "The goal is to get here, and, you need to collect all the coconut,"
okay.
or whatever it is. Or Mario 64 where it's like, shows you where the star is, like, that's the goal. You need to do this to get that, and it could not necessarily in like a handholdy way, but just in a way that foolproofs misunderstandings.
Right. Right.
Um I like that style. I like kids games a lot. Like, maybe it's because 'cause I'm expecting one, but I was just thinking
Mm,
more and more about, like, what are the things that I enjoy that I'm gonna be able to easily share with my kids that don't require all this, initiation and such, will be very interesting, and trying to
be ready to become infuriated at how games are targeted towards children.
I'm already
And
infuriated. Yeah.
That's a whole chapter
And
of
candy too. Yeah. And also how things are targeted at mothers
mm,
irritates the hell out of me, where it's like,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
um, because that stuff is just so crazy. Can you, like, maybe give an example of what you're talking about?
Oh, we used to get the Jumpstart games
Mm,
for our kids,
love
and it would
those when I was a kid.
be like a single CD or DVD,
Mhm.
and they could play the game, and that was that. It was a nice exchange. I give you money, give me the CD, done. And this isn't just kids games, obviously, but I remember we got a Jumpstart. It was like 3D Jumpstart for one of our kids, and I was excited about it because it's a new Jumpstart. Yeah, and they're exploring this kingdom, and then my kid's like, "Oh, daddy, I can't go into the castle." Like, okay, just figure it out. Solve the puzzles, do your thing. And they're like, "No, no, no, we can't go into the castle." I'm like, "What is it?" I come and I look, and it's like, you need to subscribe to the monthly online version of Jumpstart if you want to go into the castle. To like strangle somebody at that point.
Yeah, I can't stand those
That
guys.
that is infuriating because I bought the CD. I
Yeah,
bought it. I paid for that.
yeah.
And they're like, "Oh, they're not giving me the thing
I think
that I paid for."
World of Warcraft, like, was the best and worst thing to ever happen to gaming in that regard, where it
I
introduced that
understand
model.
World of Warcraft though, and this is for adults. People know what they're getting into. There's no bait. This was
Mm,
bait. I bought bait.
yeah, yeah.
I
And then
bought
now
bait
you
and
have
I
to
handed it
contest
to
of,
my
like,
kid,
am I
and
gonna tell my kid that you
they
can't go
got
into the castle? Yeah,
oh oh no, no, they didn't go into the castle.
right.
That was the end of that.
There's no castles. No more jump start for you.
I was like, this is not happening in my house.
Mhm,
You can play any one of these other many games that we have
right.
because you have to nip that thing in the bud. You can't let that sort of thing happen.
Yeah.
I can't.
I just yeah. I just really like, I like when you buy something, period, in any aspect, and you get the thing. Like,
You get the
that's
thing you
the
paid for.
end of the transaction.
Right. Yeah, that's hard to come by these days.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's definitely one of the guiding principles in my game design.
Right.
I do not have any microtransactions or monthly subscriptions
I
or
think an
or whatever.
add-on needs to be an add-on. It needs to add value to the product, not make good on the promise that was originally promised by the product afterward,
Right. Right.
after
Exactly.
I've gotten more money out of you. And there's also a degree of, like, the transparency of that. Like, if it was like, "Well, if we make enough sales, we'll be able to design the rest of the city." Sure, but let that be reflected in the price and clearly communicated and such.
Yeah.
Um, if it said, like, "Castle yacht not yet developed because we're going broke over here at Jumpstart,"
Right.
I might feel
Then
differently.
just don't put the castle in.
Right, yeah,
Don't make it a manipulating your child
yeah.
without your knowledge.
One of the more interesting
And
things I've heard
yeah.
was about, like, articles that would come out that would say things like, studies show that kids, participating in athletics actually benefit from eating, candy like M&Ms or something
Mm,
afterwards to replenish their sugar. And the thing is, I mean, there's other ways to do it for sure. But
mhm.
the subliminal message of that is like when the mother is or father, whoever, is standing in the grocery store line and the kid's like, "Oh, I really want the M&Ms." They feel iteratively over time, slightly less bad about saying no because there's a little nugget of justification
Right.
as to why that would be okay. And that
Mhm.
they do this on purpose. Like this is a like known thing in the John Hamm's Mad Men side of the
Right.
company or whatever. So for sure, that's pretty screwy.
Yeah. Yeah, especially with sugar, which is such a health issue
Mhm.
that we've all been kind of hornswoggled on over our entire lives. Uh, and salt, man, I'm trying to cut my salt. I don't know if you can see it, but my eye has a red blotch, uh, which is because of a raised blood pressure, and then some kind of event will trigger it. Like I think I sneezed.
You just need to have a bowl of Honey Nut Cheerios every morning.
Yeah, well, even the sugar in that is a lot, but
I know, but the like clinically proven to lower
yeah,
cholesterol. Yeah,
yeah. I think that if I go with the real original Cheerios, maybe that'll help.
yeah.
But I am making efforts to cut salt, but it's like you're so used to it, and it should never have been there in the quantities it's which it's there. It's like, what are we doing, man?
Yeah, I was reading a book last night that was talking about, um, like how, for instance, like people in South America that chew cocoa leaves are
Yeah,
fine, but then when you purify that down to
right.
like cocaine, it becomes a
Yeah,
problem. Same
right,
the
right.
difference between a glass of Merlot and a synthesized gin
Mm,
to like and the moral that was being made by the author was basically like if the plant is still alive you can make friends, but if
mm,
you have to kill it in large quantities to make the product, we're not friends anymore. Same thing with
right.
sugarcane
Nice.
and everything else, yeah. Um,
One thing I've noticed though is unsweetened and unsalted foods actually taste good. Our taste buds are so overwhelmed by the salt and the sugar that we're not able to recognize the good flavors that exist without
I,
that
my wife is,
stimulant.
like, addicted to hot sauce,
Mhm.
specifically, like, Cajun hot sauce, and she puts it on
Louisiana
every
Red.
yeah, good stuff.
It
And
is.
but to me, I think I have a tendency to think about, like, okay, this dish is I'm the cook primarily, like, I really like to cook.
Yeah.
So, if I make, like, something that's like, "Oh, this is Italian," you know, and then she puts
Oh,
Cajun spice on it, I'm like,
nope.
"Wrong," and she gets mad, she's like, "Why do you care what I eat?" Or, if I
Right,
think it would be better with hot sauce or whatever, I'm like, "That's not the point." I'm like, "Okay, if I make you Mexican food, put Mexican hot sauce on it."
right, right.
But but it is that same deal where it's like, you just your taste buds, your psychology even associated with it gets conditioned to, with
I've
the way
been on kind of a hot sauce kick, and now I'm ending it because
nice.
I looked at the label,
Mhm.
and this is way too much sodium. And man, look at soy sauce too. I don't know if you've partaken of soy sauce.
Lots of soy sauce, but, there's no harm in getting the low sodium green label soy sauce.
Yeah, it is crazy
It's just
how
as good.
much.
And a lot of these products, like food products in general, like that are extreme in those values, were sort of invented and designed with a poverty mindset. So, like
Mm,
refried beans being the act of making beans and then refrying them in lard
mm,
made sense for someone who's otherwise going to starve and needs as many calories and as much fat as
right,
possible to live.
right.
But when you're every single time you go to a Mexican restaurant to eat a giant burrito with a
Yeah,
side of refried beans, turns out that doesn't translate in
yeah.
quantity. So,
Another factor,
it is delicious.
I was talking to a doctor who is of Indian Pakistani heritage,
Mhm.
and Indian Pakistani food has a lot of oil and fat and stuff in it. And he was saying this was great for the people who needed it, who were
Yeah.
working the fields and they had physical labor jobs, and this would sustain them. and give them the energy they needed. And we're eating it today. We're so sedentary, and it just kills you. It's like
Yeah.
I'm not putting down the Indo-Pakistani food industry, but because it's not limited to that industry. That was just the conversation I was having. But yeah, like I noticed that if I eat certain foods, not just Indo-Pakistani food, I am miserable the next day a lot of the times, depending on what particular dish. Um, and especially like lamb. Lamb is so fatty that my body just doesn't know what to do with it. It's like, get this out of me. Get this stuff
Um,
out of me. I don't know what to do with it. But yeah, video games.
no, not necessarily, because we're getting near the end of the what's going to be
Yeah.
this total conversation. So I need to, unless you just want to talk about video games, I need to know what you think of all these drones and UAP sightings and such over the last several months.
Oh, like in New Jersey.
All of it, and to Arizona too. Ironically,
Is it Arizona?
this started happening in Tucson and New Jersey right after I left Tucson. So I was, like, there, a week later, I was here, and
Okay.
that's when and I'm like, "I missed it," like, so
Dang.
angry. But,
I
obviously, they
mean,
were communicating with me and waiting until I was out of the way before they started messing with people because we're friends. Uh,
I think the explanations, the logical, physical explanations are there. They're drones.
right.
So
Whose drones?
I'm not too well, okay, yeah, from a security side, I assume someone's looking into that. Maybe I'm wrong. But my UFO mind is not intrigued at this
Okay.
point by what I've seen. It's like, okay, these are probably drones. I don't know who's doing them. Yeah, that's definitely a more security type concern, which that's not something that I necessarily have a lot of opinions about, I guess.
Okay. Okay.
I, I mean, I understand the interest and the concern, but I'm not the right person to ask about it.
So your answer is that you do not think that there's a they're likely to be, um, extra or ultra terrestrial beings of any kind, that they're
I haven't seen anything that would suggest that they are.
yeah. There's some
But
interesting stuff in that regard. I mean, I'm,
yeah,
Occam's razor also on the
yeah,
whole thing, but then there's a few things that are like, okay, what are they looking for?
yeah.
And why aren't they talking about that? And I lean towards national defense more than
Mm.
anything. Like,
I mean, certainly it could be, right? I mean, we've got at least the Pentagon saying that they've got these UFOs on tape and that they defy explanation at this point. Um, there was a very interesting that one that the Pentagon released. I think it was in 2020.
mhm,
There was a very interesting YouTube video about it that did explain the pivotal movement of that thing, and it was in terms of the camera itself was on a gimbal, and the shape we were seeing was actually the lens flare, not the shape of the object, and that totally explained why that pivot was happening on the film. And it to me, I was like, "Oh, that makes a lot of sense," and I'm ready to just say goodbye to that one. But, you know, um,
but then there's that, and then there's also the times when it's like they just give the worst possible explanation for something ever,
yeah,
or just like
yeah, for sure.
outright deny things, and that's what I think what fuels the fire of like the perpetual skepticism
Yeah.
of. And then there was like when the drones happened, like the U.S. government didn't say shit. They were like,
Mm,
let's just ignore that. And then the
interesting.
now president was like, they know what it is. They're just not going to say anything. And then, of course, we're going to tell you as soon as we get in office. And then the next thing that comes up, the statement that got made a couple weeks ago was like, they're ours. That's about it. No more
Which is
talking about it. So, um, I feel like it's a national defense thing. The best possible of all the explanations I've heard people throw out there is that they are sniffing. They're being used to detect radiation.
mm,
And so then there was likely to have been maybe a threat of some kind that they did not want public. They send
uh,
out the drones to sniff around, and then they take care of business without making a big show of it, because that would be bad if they did. Um,
okay.
that makes a lot of sense to me. I can at least buy that that's part of it. Another way of looking at it is that there's a mixture of things up there where it's like, there was a actual not explainable UAP, and these are government ones that are looking for whatever that was and chasing
Mm,
it down to combat it or whatever. And maybe they didn't have time to spin up the public on like this new technology we have or whatever when the threat became, something they needed to go after.
right.
Um, uh, Unlikely that it's Chinese or Russian. I don't know who else would. I mean, Iran, perhaps. I don't know. North Korea, doubt it.
Is there a reason it can't be domestic, like civilian?
It would be interesting to figure out what civilians who they are who can operate this many drones of that
Mm,
type, that long without losing any of them in
interesting.
in concert in a concentrated area in multiple different areas near a military base undetected. Would
Mm,
be it's pretty far-fetched. I mean, I'm not saying
yeah.
it's not possible. Um, but, there's, like, this whole thing with, like, all of the people who are undocumented in the country right now.
Hmm.
Leave people's opinion about that to themselves, I don't care. But the thing is that, like, who knows what intentions they may or may not have had and what they're
Right.
bringing in with them, who they're communicating with outside the country, etcetera. And are they coordinating something? And then therefore, there might
Right.
be a good reason to sweep the area for potential weapons or
Oh,
whatever it is that they're looking for.
I have a wide range of different interests, and I, I I'm not really someone who can speak on like national security stuff. That's just not my purview. Like I don't know what I believe you're absolutely right that there is a concern, and
Mm.
I wouldn't know what to make of it. I kind of assume the people in charge are dealing with it if it was a real threat. And but yeah, I mean, I guess you will find out. But yeah, the whole drone thing has blown open UFOs in a way that it's really hard to like. I believed stuff before more than I do now. Now I'm way more skeptical. Like that could be a drone. That looks like a drone. you know.
Yeah,
But
I just tend to think that there's probably multiple things happening at once.
yeah,
Like, the sort of the age old, aliens being in a, nuts and bolts metal ship.
right.
And then there's like the question of like, is there a trans-dimensional aspect to it, like a light
Yeah,
beings or whatever, and some of I mean, the change from UFO to UAP actually makes sense. Like, an aerial phenomenon is not necessarily an object. It could be
ah,
a ball of fire, it could be just something you saw in the sky that doesn't have a physical form. There's all kinds of conspiracy to this, like,
yeah,
is it angelic? Is it demonic? Is it, are they all in concert? Are they operating in the same space from different time frames or from different, are there multiple races of aliens? People have gone all the way down the David Icke rabbit hole of, the
yeah.
Archons and the Reptoids and the Greys and the Nordics and all this sort of thing. And like, maybe they're all there. Maybe that's all part of it. I don't know.
To
Is it?
me, I'm very open minded about this
Yeah.
stuff, as you know from our previous conversations, and I that's something that I've been thinking also recently. It's just like the universe is so big, it's so vast that why not? Why not millions of different alien species? They see Earth, they see, oh, there's lights. Let's check it out. Uh, right, like that could be happening. It's impossible so far to prove that that's happening. It's also impossible not to disprove that's happening. But like on a case by case basis, when there's a reasonable explanation or description of what could be happening, I tend to go with that. Also, I have that skeptical side, which is just like, yeah, that's probably exactly what this person is describing it. So, but I don't like the skeptical outlook that just dismisses it all either. I think there has to be a balance because the amount we know about this universe it's got to be minuscule in comparison to the amount of actual knowledge that's there. We have a tiny drop in the ocean, you know,
Mhm.
and I think you have to keep your mind open. And our tendency is to want to know and to want to be in the know. So we'll jump on one bandwagon or another, usually depending on who our friends are, right?
Yep.
And we just stick with that. And then all of our effort is into defending that side that we've already chosen. And I don't think that's necessarily healthy. I think it's okay not to know the answer. And that's kind of where I stay on these things. Like, I don't know. I don't know what it is. I
Are you
don't, yeah.
are you familiar with the, Chris Bledsoe case?
Mm-mm,
Pretty
no.
recent. So he has, like, a book out and stories and stuff that, of his life and everything, but he basically, like, had a UFO encounter in 2007,
Okay.
and then he's, like, uh, of the opinion that he interacted with something angelic and
Mm,
that he continues to be visited by something that is, divine in nature. Um, and describes them as like orbs and then also like childlike small glowing creatures that like can only be perceived by someone who is allowed to, that they have the ability to
okay.
like read your thoughts and to like control who does and doesn't see them and who they manifest to.
Yeah.
And while I'm not necessarily like 100% sold on his story, he's very convincing, don't get me wrong,
Yeah.
but I mean, same as always, like, okay, who can corroborate this?
Yeah. Yeah. That's
And
the
that's
tough part.
apparently NASA and CIA are all over this guy too, like doing tests on him and like actually
Okay.
interested in him. So there's part of that too. But yeah, like just the point of view that these glowing orbs that people see, for instance, are not necessarily like visitors from outer space, but visitors from a higher dimension.
Yeah.
I find that to be extremely fascinating. Like,
Yeah.
'cause it goes from, like, a science fiction thing to like, a nearly, like, spiritual, religious point of view. It's like, well, testing the belief systems of a lot of people, like, if you're I believe in angels. You ever seen, what's that movie that's on every Christmas? Jimmy Stewart.
The
Um,
Wonderful Life.
yeah, It's a Wonderful Life, where they're sitting in the pub and he's with the angel and the guy's like talking openly about what they're doing and all that kind of stuff. And then he's like, "Hey, maybe you ought to be quiet in here." And he's like, "Well, don't these people believe in angels?" And he's like, "Well, I mean, yeah, they do, but," he's like, "Well, then why should they be surprised when they see one?"
Mm,
So it would
yeah.
it that's what I find interesting about it, is like the skepticism from people who do have these belief systems. Tucker Carlson is pretty open about, like, he's like, "Oh, I think that there are angels and demons. I think that's what we're witnessing."
Okay.
And, like, that's interesting too. And
I am fully on board that is one possibility.
yeah,
Uh, uh, my belief is that there there are angels, there are devils. Um, do they manifest themselves publicly on cameras? I don't know. Is that might be the case. There's definitely stories from tradition that suggest that they do appear as lights and stuff. Um, there's I want to say I don't want to say I'm of two minds because I definitely believe in that, but does that translate into the phenomena we're witnessing, or people are claiming to be witnessing?
Mhm.
I don't know. Again, I'm okay not knowing. Um, I haven't had those experiences. I've had other experiences that most people would dismiss as dreams, but I don't think dreams necessarily need to be dismissed. I think they're experiences regardless of how they come to you. And those experiences led me to believe things, right? And I think those are valid as long as the thing about religion is I don't think you can prove it or disprove it. I don't think it operates at that level. But
Mhm.
I also think it shouldn't go directly against things you can prove or disprove, right? So I try to understand my religion in a way that matches what I see in the world and what I experience in the world. Um,
As above, so below.
if you will, yeah, I guess.
Yeah.
So the existence of God, like, is that something I can bring out on a lab table and cut open and demonstrate? No, I can't. But neither can the scientist or the skeptic or the atheist bring out the absence of God. That doesn't make it true. I get that, but it also doesn't make it not true, right? It's something we're gonna either find out or not.
I find it really interesting because I think the whole debate in the layman debate that comes about
Yeah.
this, there's gonna be apologists and, you know,
Mm,
theologians and religious leaders and such who have done a lot of work one way or the other.
right.
But there's also, like, just the logic of how the conversation is approached. Like, a question like, "Can you prove God exists?" It's like, the first question is, "What is it that I'm trying to prove to you that exists?"
Mm,
Like, if you're asking me, "Can I prove to you that there's a man in the sky?" Which I'm not even asserting,
right.
right? That's
Right. What
right.
is your definition of that word?
Is there a highest potential principle that all things fall underneath the category of?
Mm,
Undoubtedly, that seems to be the case. I mean, like, that's interesting too. Like, it's just a matter of, like, how do you define that? Like, do you want me
right.
to believe in your, in like your description of something where it's like there's a thing with a goat's head or whatever that does this and it lives in this place that you could go to if you could just get there and all that. I'm like, well, not necessarily, but is there good and evil in the world, and do they continually play out in certain patterns throughout time and space? Yes or no. Maybe. It's age-old debate.
And that's why it's gonna come back to your beliefs. It's a
Mm,
different belief doesn't just mean you think something is true.
right.
I think it's a deeper concept than that. It's the things you actually act on, right?
But potentiality and action, are 2 different things. Will you give me, like, 3 minutes? I'm gonna go grab a book and come back and read you a
Yeah,
passage.
yeah, sure.
Interesting. Okay. This is gonna be fun. My wife's gonna be
Alright.
mad 'cause we'll be late for dinner, but I don't care.
Okay. I'm late too, so we're good.
Right. So, there's, like, the idea that scientifically you need to be able to do the same experiment and come up with the same results, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then there's the point of view that there is no 2 people that have the same point of view. 2 people look at the moon standing right
Right.
next to each other or even standing in the same spot, and then, like, you're not seeing the same thing because your brain is manifesting memories that you have of different things that add up to this and how you
Yeah.
perceive it. Or even just the fact that time has changed and therefore your position in space has changed. Like, you're looking at the moon standing in the same spot, I'm looking at the moon standing in the same spot. We're actually thousands of miles, maybe millions of miles displaced in the space-time continuum between those two things happening.
Right.
So you're not having the same experience. So you really can't prove anything. There's objective truth, which is like we can repeat it and get the same results, and maybe
Yeah.
in a containable scale, it's possible, but you can never truly have the same experience twice.
Fair.
Right.
The problem with relying on that, and you have to rely on that for stuff like physical things, like science and running experiments and even making things in the world like products and all that.
Mhm.
But there's things that you cannot reproduce. By their very definition, they're not reproducible, which is what a human being, for instance, experiences after death. You cannot reproduce that, at least based on the technology we have right now. You know, there's going to be a limit to whatever this science of ours can accomplish.
Right.
But that doesn't mean those experiences are invalid. They're just hard to define and objectify,
So
which is why you have to go back to beliefs at a certain point.
there's the idea that we sort of exist within a four-dimensional world that we, or at least that we can perceive, right? So there's like
Mhm.
one dimension, two dimensions, which is flat, three dimensions being a physical object that takes up three, points in
Yep.
space that are not in line with each other. And then there's time, and then physicists at this point are saying there's something like many more than that.
Yeah.
So this was just like an explanation that I read of potential higher dimensions than the ones we had, starting with 0. So I'm gonna try to start from a reasonable place and go from there, if you don't mind.
No, I don't mind.
Okay. One must formulate the thesis: if there is anything except nothing, it must exist within the boundless light, within the space, within this inconceivable nothingness, which cannot exist as nothingness, but has to be conceived of as a nothingness composed of the annihilation of two imaginary opposites. Thus appears the point which has neither parts nor magnitude, but only a position. So
Mm.
nothing, but also something. But position does not mean anything at all unless there is something else, some other position to which it can be compared. One has to describe it, and thus the only way to do this is to have another point, and that means that one must invent the number 2, making possible the line.
Yep.
Okay. But this
I'm with you.
line,
I'm with you.
yep, does not really mean very much because there is yet no measure of length, and the limit of knowledge at this stage is that there are two things in order to be able to talk about them at all. But one cannot say that they are near each other or that they are far apart. One can only say that they are distant. In order to discriminate between them at all, there must be a third thing. We
Mhm.
must have another point. One must invent the surface and one must invent the triangle. In doing this, incidentally, appears the whole of plane geometry, and one can now say A is nearer to B than A is to C. But so far, there is no substance in any of these ideas. In fact, there are no ideas at all except for the idea of distance and perhaps the idea of betweenness and of angular measurement, so that plane geometry, which now exists in theory, is after all completely inchoate and incoherent. There has been no approach at all to the conception of a really existing thing. No more has been done than to make definitions all in a purely ideal and imaginary world. Then comes the abyss. So one cannot go any further into the ideal. The next step must be the actual, at least an approach to the actual. So there are 3 points, and there is no idea of where any of them is. And a fourth point is essential, and this formulates the idea of matter. So now we have a 3-dimensional object, starting with 0, right? So the point, the line, and the plane, and the fourth point, unless should happen to lie in the plane gives the solid. If one wants to know the position of any point, one must define it by the use of 3 coordinate axes. It is so many feet from the north wall, and so many feet from the east wall, and so many feet from the floor. Thus, there has been developed from nothingness a something which can be said to exist. And one has arrived at the idea of matter, but this existence is exceedingly tenuous, for the only property at any point is its position in relation to certain other points. No change is possible and nothing can happen. One is therefore compelled in the analysis of known reality to postulate a fifth positive idea, which is that of motion. This implies the idea of time, for only through motion and in time can any event happen, and without this change in sequence, nothing can be the object of sense. It is to be noticed that the number. Okay, I'm just going to skip over this part because it's just talking about something that happened already in the book. This is the traditionally consecrated to the Great Mother, and in this womb, in which the Great Father, who is presented by the letter Yod, which is pictorially the representation of an ultimate point, and it moves and begets active existence. That's citing Hebrew. I didn't spell that out. There is now possible a concrete idea of the point, and at least it is a point which can be self-conscious because it can have a past, present, and future. It is able to define itself in terms of the previous ideas. And here is the number 6, the center of the system, self-conscious and capable of experience. At this stage, it is convenient to turn away for a moment from the strictly Kabbalistic symbolism. The doctrine of the next 3 numbers, to some minds at least, is not very clearly expressed, and one must look to the Vedanta system for a more lucid interpretation of the numbers 7, 8, and 9, although they correspond very closely with the Kabbalistic ones. The Hindu analysis of existence, the Rishish, I apologize in advance if I'm pronouncing things wrong, just reading books. These are sages, postulate 3 qualities: Sat, the existence of being itself; Chit, thought or intellection; and Ananda, usually translated as bliss, the pleasure experienced by being in the course of events. And this ecstasy is evidently the exciting cause of the mobility of pure existence. It explains the assumption of imperfection on the part of perfection. The absolute would be nothing, would remain in the condition of nothingness, therefore, in order to be conscious of its possibilities and to enjoy them. It must explore these possibilities. One may here insert a parallel statement of this doctrine for the document called the Book of the Great Auk, to enable the student to consider the position from the standpoint of 2 different minds. All elements must at one time have been separate. That would be the case with great heat. Now, when the atoms get to the sun, we get to the immense extreme heat, and all of the elements are themselves again. Imagine that each atom of each element possesses the memory of all of his adventures in combination. By the way, that atom fortified with memory would not be the same atom, yet it is, because it has gained nothing from anywhere except this memory. Therefore, by the lapse of time and by virtue of memory, a thing could become something more than itself. Thus, a real development is possible. One can then see a reason for any element deciding to go through the series of incarnations, because so and only so can he go, and he suffers the lapse of memory which he has during these incarnations, because he knows he will come through unchanged. Therefore, you can have an infinite number, individual and equal through diverse, each one supreme and utterly indestructible. And this basically comes back around to the number 10 in a 10-base system being the addition of 1 and 0. That once you've established all of the numbers up to that point, that's all of the dimensions, and then you build another layer of dimensionality on top of that, which is how our number system works. I found that to be super weird. I don't know if it means anything, but I'm curious.
It's bringing to mind 2 very specific things.
Cool.
The first is, it sounded for a while like you were reading directly out of the Dungeons and Dragons Immortal Rules book.
I'm not.
Because they had the exact same explanation of why higher dimensions have to exist.
Okay.
Which was very compelling for me at the time. And then the other thing reminds me of a book by Rupert Sheldrake. He's a British scientist. And the book, the title of the book was Set Science Free.
Mhm.
And he talks about, I think it's 10 different, basically, assumptions that we have, that scientists have, that need to be questioned, and they're not being questioned. And once we question those assumptions, there's a lot of extra science that can happen, right? Like these things can be, dug into. They may very well turn out to be absolutely true assumptions, but they're basically just assumptions at this point. And one of the things he pointed out was that, and the evidence. I'm not a scientist. I can't, you know, reference all the evidence he had in that book, but it was why crystals form in certain patterns, and that certain crystal forms have been known to form in different patterns, right? But at a certain point in time, they started all forming in this other pattern that we know now, which is just kind of crazy to think about. Um, but what he said is called, the way he defined it is called a morphic field, and it's like the atoms remember something, and once they've learned a thing, like this is just the only way you can define it is kind of in human language because we don't really know the workings of it yet. But once they've learned how to assemble themselves, then they all do it. And this is just my very layman's version of what he described in much more rigorous terms. But I think that really opened my mind to things. Um, that it's not all known, right? A lot of the stuff we just take for granted are just actually not known at all, how they actually operate. And there's a lot of mounting evidence that goes against what is commonly held to be true,
Mhm.
but it's all kind of dismissed as, oh, that must have been bad measurement or this or that. Like, for instance, the speed of light. Speed of light has a specific number, but that number has actually changed several times over the history of people knowing and talking about the speed of light. And the assumption is that we're just getting more accurate, but actually, if you look at the evidence, it looks like the speed of light might change
Right. It's
because,
it is
yeah,
inconstant, or it is asserted to be
it's
constant.
not always exactly the same. I don't know. I can't answer that question. Maybe it is always the same. Maybe it's not. But to him, that's an interesting thing that we could research,
Right.
right? And
Doing a
really
calculation
find
based on
out.
what is the square root of -1, for instance, or pi.
Sure.
Um, yeah, like, we don't really know what pi is all the way.
Not all the way,
Right.
right?
And yeah, so, like, every single, like, equation that inserts pi anywhere is an estimation by definition.
Right.
Or, using an imaginary number to calculate something is like, well, it's imaginary. It
Yeah.
it makes predictions and it does so well, and therefore we postulate that that's, at least it's useful. It's useful
Yeah,
in
you land planes with
practical
it, right?
practical science, yes, but does it explain the nature of the universe? And the answer
Yeah.
is, I don't know. Not to me.
Right.
Not yet.
Right.
Yeah. It's so compelling.
Yeah. Good stuff, man. What is
Mhm.
that, by the way?
That is the Book of Thoth on the Egyptian Tarot by one Aleister Crowley, which I'm reading right
Oh,
now.
okay.
Yeah. But
Yeah,
it's
I'm sure the
him.
Dungeons and Dragons guys read some Crowley.
I'm sure that they were reading him, and he was reading I Ching and Kabbalah
Yeah.
and lots of other things, and, probably threw his own magic in there too, to a
Right.
large degree.
Right.
But I just, yeah, like, anything like that where it's just like, like a thought experiment. How do you think
Mm.
about higher dimensions? What are they? And
Yeah.
this particular book, it's just trying to explain how to think about the tarot and how it, uh, overlaps with the Kabbalistic tree of life. So,
I think there's a lot to be found in the older spiritual traditions that are taken kind of as myth,
mhm,
but they actually end up describing things that we are now witnessing through our scientific sort of apparatuses. Um, and whether that indicates a previous civilization more advanced than ours, or approaching the same level of advancement that got lost, or whether it's a divine revelation of some sort, or whether it's more an intuitive thing people thought up and it turned out to be kind of true. You know, all of these are possibilities, but it's that's really fascinating to me, because it's kind of the intersection of spirituality and scientific thought. And I'm adamant that those things don't have to go against each other. They can be understood in a way that's congruent with one another.
right.
If you make the effort, if you're not just trying to win an argument, you can actually understand things from both of those viewpoints as a cohesive whole. That I don't see the harm in doing that. I think that we should be making the effort to do that. That seems like something like a noble effort that needs to be driven for, rather than trying to use one to outshine the other, kind of thing.
So, what do you make of the fact that you yourself have created real existing worlds that have things in them that have consequences? Like you were talking earlier about a guy playing your
Yeah,
game and wanting the cat removed, with the
yeah,
sound of
yeah,
the cat dying to be removed and such, and you decide what the morals are in your world and how the avatar you can't maybe you can't influence how the soul on the other side of the computer
yeah.
feels about it, but like what their avatar can and can't do and what they can how they can influence it and all that. I think game design is to me, that is one of the most interesting things about it is that you are the god of your own little world when you make a game.
I would never put it in those words,
Sure.
because that would be kind of an insulting to me, kind of a I wouldn't want to say that about myself.
Sure.
A designer, yes, fine. But yeah, I think I try to make sure that the games I make line up with the beliefs that I have in some way. They don't It's not always a one-to-one, like Islands of the Caliph was more one-to-one, like, this is my religion, I'm kinda just, here it is, kinda thing.
Yep.
But in Cyclopean, it's a little more abstract, and it's also influenced for sure by other things I've read and understood in the past outside of the framework of religion, which is a weird thing to juggle. But I also think that there's a lot of ideas that are compatible, right? And I'm trying to emphasize those. Yeah, it could make it about, like, I could make a Lovecraft game about black magic and witchery and all these things like that. That's a valid sort of approach to working with his material as a source, but that's not the game I would want to make with it. Um, so yeah, it's as far as the design process, it's all about making decisions, right? I have to choose which players to listen to. If one guy's saying the tent needs to be earlier in the game because it gives you this safety zone, and another player is like, this tent is way too powerful and it should be limited. I can't I can't incorporate
Mhm.
both of those feedbacks. I have to choose
Those
one
are
or the
those are
other.
prayers.
or find the middle path between the two, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, am I creating a world? No, I don't think of this as creating a world. It's it's designing a an experience, right? For
What
people
if that's
for
how
people
the
in the world.
what if that's how the big G thinks about us? What if we're not a world? What if we are just an experience?
Um, I mean, there's an argument there. There's an argument to make there that we our interactions are somehow illusory, and I don't go into that because it would kind of imply that I don't see how that would benefit me to think that way.
Sure. I think that's a valid way of looking at it too. Like, does this
Yeah.
serve me? One of the most interesting things I've heard someone say was they were talking about like astral projection and like remote viewing, and
Mm,
uh, claimed to have basically had a conversation with some other beings in the universe outside of this reality,
okay.
and they came to the conclusion that like amongst all of the souls that exist out there in the universe, whether or not they pass through this one, that being human is like an impressive badge of honor
Mm,
because not all souls do that run, that experience. Because it's like, why would you choose to limit yourself to 3 dimensions? Like, that's
mm,
crazy, you know? And then, like, so the ones that have lived this life and graduated up to the next one or whatever that is, and they're like, you know, talking about like, "What, you know, what all have you done? What all have you done?" And it's like, "Well, for a while I was a human." And they're like, "Whoa, human. Interesting. What did you learn from limiting yourself to 3 dimensions and living that whole life where you don't even get to remember that you're a perfect, beautiful soul of light?" And they're like,
yeah,
"Well, honestly, I think I'm a better, pure, perfect, beautiful soul of life for having lived that experience."
that's interesting.
It was very interesting. Probably it was a crazy caller who called into, like, Art Bell's hotline
Right,
at some point, but
right.
still, there's, like, all these little nuggets of just profound ways of thinking about things that I find endlessly fascinating.
Yeah. Uh, I tried astral projection once.
Okay, I got a little bit more time.
I probably should cut it after this. So I've got some kids upstairs.
Just tell me the
I'll
what that
tell
was
you
like
the gist of
exactly.
it. I don't
Or
know, like,
we could
again,
save it for another episode if you
uh,
want to.
I opened the door, so I wouldn't
Alright,
wanna deny the
run an ad right before this.
we had these Time Life books about mysteries of the unexplained,
Mhm.
and they described it in there. And I went through all the steps, and my experience, whatever you wanna call it, dream, reality, something in between the 2, I don't know. My experience was that I emerged from my body. I looked around my room. I saw myself lying in the bed through the mirror, like I could see myself in the mirror, and I got the hell scared out of me, and I went back in. It was not a comfortable, joyous experience for me. It was, "What the hell am I doing?" Sorry for my language. I That's the only word that keeps coming out of that experience. It's like,
Yeah,
"This is not good. I don't need to be here. I need to go back into my safety of my body and stay there."
maybe you flew a little too close to the sun. Maybe that was
Uh,
off limits for you.
I didn't even leave my bedroom, so
Yeah, maybe that was the tree falling in the forest telling you, like,
yeah,
go no further down this path.
yeah.
You're good where you're at." Man, thank you for making experiences that I continue to enjoy. I really appreciate it.
I hope to be able to continue to do that while I am in this plane of existence.
I hope I get to see you out there in space and we can talk about, well, man, remember when we were human, bro?
Right.
That was wild. We were like telling each other stuff we already knew. Isn't that weird? Um, yeah, man. Seriously, like, thank you so much for being still number one most occurrences on the show. Definitely gonna do it again. Sure.
It's a record to beat now.
Yep. All right.
Thank you for having me. As always, it's a pleasure, and I love your questions and the exchange of ideas we always have.
Thank you to Mike, one of my all-time favorite guests. As always, he was incredible. So make sure that you are following him on all those social mediums and whatnot, and go right now. And don't just buy Cyclopean: The Great Abyss. Don't just buy that game. Buy all of his games right now. Star Explorers, amazing. Paradox Vector, awesome. Islands of the Caliph, incredible. Anomalies, great. Use it to make soundtracks for your game if you want to. You totally can. Yeah, just thank you to all of our wonderful Patreon supporters. Shannon, Ant, Michael, Fred, Brad, y'all rule. If you're not already in the Patreon, you should consider joining. You get access to all kinds of cool things. Links in the show notes and on our website, inthekeep.com. Yeah. I love you. God love you. Stay in the keep. Keep going. Keep trying. Keep working. Keep pushing. Keep it up. Keep on keeping on. You're a keeper.